Betrayal in relationships is not a legal crime, but it is a conscious act that harms someone who has trusted you deeply. This betrayal can lead to significant emotional pain and can sometimes escalate into situations that involve actual crimes. The story of Kathy Cho was unusual from the start. Investigators first thought she might have run away from her strict parents, been kidnapped by one of her many online followers, or taken an impulsive trip with someone without informing anyone. There were even rumors suggesting that her parents could be involved in her disappearance. Sadly, Kathy was never seen alive again. For over a year, the investigation went nowhere until unexpected clues emerged from an unlikely source. Shockingly, the culprit had been hiding in plain sight the entire time and even managed to pass a lie detector test. Kathy's parents came from a small province in Taiwan. In 1989, they moved to the United States in search of a better life and settled in Renton, Washington, which is close to Seattle. At that time, they spoke very little English, which made it hard for them to adjust to their new surroundings. They led a private and isolated life, seldom interacting with neighbors or the local community. On November 29, 1990, they had their only child, a daughter named Kathy Cho. Unlike her parents, who found it challenging to connect with others, Kathy was a cheerful, outgoing, and lively young woman. She had a natural ability to make friends, but her upbringing was strict, influenced by her parents' cultural values and traditions. Kathy was not allowed to invite friends over and had to report where she was, with whom at all times. As she got older, the restrictive environment at home became more challenging for her. Even though Kathy followed her parents' rules, she often felt constrained and isolated. In high school, she set up multiple profiles on social media, where she openly shared information about herself, her interests, her experiences. These platforms allowed her to connect with others and escape some of her parents' limitations. She even developed a modest following online, which helped her deal with the lack of freedom in her everyday life. As Kathy started dating and expressing interest in boys, her father's disapproval became more intense. Her father criticized every young man she interacted with, as he strongly disapproved of the relaxed and independent lifestyles of American teenagers. He was convinced that his daughter should marry someone from Taiwan rather than a local man. He frequently shared his growing disappointment with life in America with his wife, expressing regrets about immigrating and often mentioning his wish to return to their homeland. In the fall of 2009, 18-year-old Kathy Cho was in her senior year of high school when she started dating Ezekiel James Watkins, who was 2.5 years older than her. They had known each other since their teenage years. As Ezekiel also attended Renton High School, their relationship lasted only a couple of months, and during that time, Ezekiel never visited Kathy's home. Instead, they met in neutral locations or spent time at Ezekiel's apartment, which he shared with a friend. This was because Kathy's father, Mr. Chu, strongly disapproved of Ezekiel due to his unconventional appearance and bold behavior. Ezekiel was a musician and a popular figure, known for frequently changing girlfriends. Kathy was thrilled when he showed interest in her and was so determined to continue seeing him that she sometimes lied to her father and defied her parents' wishes to sneak out for dates with Ezekiel. After the new year, Kathy's relationship with Ezekiel ended just as quickly as it had begun. Ezekiel lost interest in her and soon started dating other young women, one of whom was Kathy's classmates. This situation deeply hurt Kathy, whether it was intentional or not. She had truly loved Ezekiel. He was her first serious boyfriend. Their relationship felt special and full of promise. Kathy was determined to win him back. Initially, those close to Kathy and Ezekiel believed they had separated amicably and remained friends. Kathy soon began dating other young men, probably to demonstrate to herself, others, and especially Ezekiel, that she was still attractive. Unfortunately, this unconventional method, combined with her frantic efforts to rekindle her relationship with Ezekiel, ultimately resulted in a tragedy. On April 19, 2010, Kathy's parents reported their daughter missing to the local police. The night before, Kathy had gone out with friends, taking only her phone, and failed to come home. Her parents expected her back by 8:30 p.m., but when she didn't return, her father called her. Kathy ignored her father's calls, which only added to their worries. At 9:30 p.m., they received a message from Kathy. She said she was having coffee with a friend at Westfield South Center Mall and would be home a bit late. Although this made her father frustrated, he and her mother waited patiently for her return. However, when midnight passed and Kathy still hadn't come home and her phone was turned off, her parents became increasingly worried. They started calling Kathy's friends, but none of them had seen her that night. Concerned, her parents decided to go to the shopping mall themselves. By the time they arrived, Westfield South Center Mall was closed, except for the movie theater and a few cafes, but there was no sign of Kathy. The tension in the Cho household was rising, but her parents still hoped their daughter, Kathy, had just stayed out too late and would come home soon. By morning, when they hadn't heard from her, they decided to go to the police station to report her missing. Kathy's absence from school that day worried her teachers and classmates, as she was a responsible student who never skipped classes without a good reason. This led her parents to suspect that she might have lied to them and gone on a date. The big question was, who was she with? This was something the police would need to investigate. The investigators approached her disappearance with great urgency right from the start. They quickly began searching for her, interviewing her friends and acquaintances to gather any potential leads. Unfortunately, their initial efforts didn't yield any useful information. Detectives contacted Kathy's cell phone provider and found that her phone last connected to a network at 9:30 p.m. from a local park next to a large, marshy area. This discovery raised serious concerns. Kathy had not been at the mall as she had said. Instead, she had been in the park, where she sent her last message to her father before turning off her phone, which has remained off since then. Detectives decided to start their investigation by interviewing Kathy's ex-boyfriend, Ezekiel Watkins. When he was brought in for questioning, he appeared noticeably anxious and genuinely concerned about Kathy's disappearance. Ezekiel explained that he and Kathy had broken up around 3 months ago, but had continued to be friends. He mentioned that they had both moved on and were dating other people, so there were no hard feelings between them. He also suggested that Kathy might have been dating multiple people simultaneously, although he admitted he didn't know the names of any of her new romantic interests. When asked about his activities on the night his ex-girlfriend, Kathy Cho, went missing, Ezekiel stated that he was at home with his roommate, John Carpenter. They lived together and spent the evening playing video games until about 3 a.m., after which they went to sleep. John Neighbor, who was also acquainted with Kathy from school, confirmed Ezekiel's alibi and was willing to assist the police with their investigation. Ezekiel acknowledged that Kathy had sent him a message earlier in the evening, asking to meet. However, he turned her down, claiming he was busy because he wasn't interested in going out. He revealed that Kathy frequently tried to reach out to him, and he believed she wanted to talk about their past relationship. To avoid that conversation, he chose to make an excuse. Ezekiel's story initially appeared credible, but investigators were hesitant to rule him out as a suspect. His alibi was only supported by his roommate, prompting detectives to request that Ezekiel take a polygraph test. After some hesitation, he consented. The test results generally supported his version of events, though a few of his answers were somewhat ambiguous. Investigators considered these discrepancies to be minor and within the normal margin of error. In the end, they concluded that Ezekiel was unlikely to be connected to Kathy's disappearance and allowed him to leave after the questioning. However, questions remained about what Kathy's parents might be concealing. Kathy's friends noted that she was very active on social media and dating websites, where she often met new people. Recently, she had been on dates with several young men, yet no one seemed to know who these individuals were. Investigators believed that many answers to their questions could be found on Kathy's laptop, which included her accounts and private messages. However, they faced a major obstacle when Kathy's parents refused to allow them to enter the house. search her room, or take any of her personal items. This behavior raised suspicions among the investigators, who felt the parents might be hiding something. The police attempted to explain to Mr. and Mrs. Chu that Kathy's laptop could hold important clues, possibly even the identity of someone who could have harmed her or been involved in her disappearance. To find this information, specialists needed access to her online accounts. Despite this, her parents were uncooperative. They insisted on taking the laptop to a programmer they knew, claiming they would first review the contents themselves before handing everything over to the police. On April 21st, investigators called Kathy's parents in for questioning and recommended that they take a polygraph test. Kathy's mother immediately became upset and said she couldn't go through with it. Kathy's father, though hesitant, agreed to the test but appeared very anxious. During the test, he had intense emotional responses, often crying as he answered questions. Ultimately, he did not pass the polygraph, which heightened the suspicions about her parents. Detectives were eager to find the truth, so they interviewed the neighbors of the Chows, and their insights were interesting. The neighbors reported that Chus had moved into the house in 1989 after immigrating to the United States, but over the 20 years since, they had not formed any close relationships. The Cho family was known for being reclusive. They rarely socialized, never invited anyone to their home, avoided visiting others. Even Kathy's friends had never been allowed inside. The Chus were not considered rude. They simply preferred to maintain their privacy. They were very protective of Kathy's reputation and were cautious about her friends and social activities. This concern, investigators believed, explained their reluctance to hand over the laptop. They wanted to understand what their daughter had been involved in first. The reason they failed the polygraph test was quite straightforward. She had been missing for 3 days, so her parents were extremely emotional, filled with worry, fear, and grief. The investigator realized that their mental and emotional state would likely affect their ability to pass the test. A few days later, Kathy's father came back to the police station on his own with Kathy's laptop. This time, he agreed to take another polygraph test, and the results indicated that he was telling the truth, clearing him of any involvement in his daughter's disappearance. Kathy's parents were worried about her admirers, fearing that her laptop might contain private photos or videos that could damage her reputation. They wanted to keep everything private. Fortunately, nothing concerning was found. However, investigators learned that Kathy had been chatting online with 8 different young men and had gone on at least a couple of dates with each of them. Kathy enjoyed the attention from these young men and often bragged about it to her friends, leading some to speculate that she might have been trying to make Ezekiel jealous. Regardless of her reasons, the police had to investigate all of these young men for any connection to Kathy's disappearance. Thanks to her message history, the police were able to gather their names, phone numbers, and the dates and locations of Kathy's meetings with them. In the following days, detectives successfully located all 8 individuals and brought them in for questioning. The youngest was 17 and the oldest was 24. Kathy had met each of them online, and they did not know one another prior to this. She had reached out to them and arranged the meetings, but it was evident that she had not formed a serious relationship with any of them. However, investigators were considering whether one of them might have developed intense feelings for Kathy, potentially leading to possessiveness or jealousy. 5 of the young men provided strong, confirmed alibis for the night Kathy went missing. 2 were out of town. 1 was working an overnight shift. Another was in the hospital recovering from a car accident, and 1 spent the entire night at a bar with friends, which was verified by security camera footage. The last 3, who lacked solid alibis, voluntarily took polygraph tests and were cleared of any suspicion regarding Kathy's disappearance, leading the investigation to a standstill. For several weeks, search teams thoroughly explored the marshy area behind the park where Kathy's phone signal was last detected. Despite their extensive efforts, they found no evidence of her. Investigators also struggled to find witnesses who might have seen Kathy in the park that evening. Flyers featuring Kathy's photo were distributed across the city, and social media groups were created where friends and acquaintances exchanged information, theories about her disappearance. News outlets covered the case, urging anyone with relevant information to come forward. The police received hundreds of tips from people claiming to have seen Kathy the night she disappeared or later in various parts of the city. Unfortunately, every lead turned out to be a false alarm, as these sightings involved different young women who resembled her, often of Asian descent. The investigation quickly hit a dead end, with no new evidence, leads, or witnesses to pursue, and progress came to a standstill. By this time, most people believed that Kathy was no longer alive. However, the questions about what happened to her and who was responsible still existed. There was a lingering fear that a dangerous individual remained at large, posing a potential threat to others. In the summer of 2011, police received a call from Giovanni Candelario, who claimed to have crucial information about Kathy's disappearance. Giovanni was a friend of John Carpenter, the roommate of Ezekiel Watkins. He had been temporarily living in their apartment since April of the previous year due to a fight with his girlfriend, but he had not been mentioned in the investigation and had never been questioned by the police. Giovanni stated that he knew Kathy through mutual friends, although they were not very close. He informed the police that on the night Kathy disappeared, April 18, 2010, Ezekiel did not come home at 8 p.m., as he had previously said. Instead, Giovanni remembered Ezekiel arriving closer to midnight and asked to borrow a shovel to bury a duck. At that time, Giovanni was playing a video game but noticed that Ezekiel was covered in mud. When Giovanni inquired about it, Ezekiel explained that he had been riding his bike off-road, fell into a puddle, and got dirty. Shortly after this, Ezekiel asked John Carpenter to go outside with him. Giovanni wasn't sure how long they were gone because he had fallen asleep. When detectives questioned Giovanni about why he hadn't come forward earlier, he explained that he hadn't considered the detail important at the time. Since Ezekiel was quickly cleared as a suspect, Giovanni also was never prompted to give a statement. Candelario said he did not suspect anything at the time. However, in the following months, he noticed a significant change in Watkins's demeanor and began to question the incident. Initially, investigators doubted Giovanni's story. They thought he might have had a conflict with Ezekiel and was seeking revenge. However, they needed to confirm his claims, so detectives brought John Carpenter in for further questioning. A startling confession emerged. At first, Carpenter maintained the same story he had told a year ago, but when detectives presented him with Giovanni's testimony, his attitude noticeably shifted. He paused and questioned, "What kind of sentence will I get for concealing a crime? Is there a way to lessen it if I cooperate?" Understanding the seriousness of his predicament, Carpenter made a deal with the police. In return for a lighter sentence, he promised to provide all the information he had and to disclose the location of Kathy's remains. Carpenter tried hard to downplay his involvement in the events, maintaining that he never intended to lie to the investigators. He explained that he chose to stay silent out of fear that Ezekiel might hurt him as well. Carpenter stated that Ezekiel came home around midnight that night, covered in mud. He also remembered noticing a recent cut near Ezekiel's ear, which had been overlooked during the investigation because Ezekiel had a beard back then. Ezekiel Watkins confided in his roommate, John Carpenter, about a shocking incident that could change everything. He asked John for help and requested a small shovel from the trunk of his car. The two then made their way to a marshy area behind the park, walking through about 50 yards of thick underbrush. They stopped near the body of Kathy Cho. Ezekiel explained that her death was accidental and that he was only acting in self-defense. He pleaded with John to help him conceal the body. Together, they dragged Kathy's body further into the dense thicket, covering several more yards until it became nearly impossible to move. There, they dug a shallow grave, placed her inside, and covered her with dirt, branches. Even a year later, John could show investigators the exact burial location by using a large fallen tree as a reference point. Ezekiel was arrested the same day, but firmly maintained that he did not commit a crime, claiming it was an accident. He acknowledged that he had agreed to meet Kathy after she texted him, but he stated that she was aggressive and confrontational during their encounter. Ezekiel mentioned that Kathy was still trying to resolve their differences and had expressed this to him. To keep a low profile, Ezekiel suggested they walk to a nearby marshy area to talk. However, the argument intensified once they arrived. Ezekiel said that Kathy's behavior became even more intense. At one point, he took out a knife he always carried, claiming he did not intend to harm her but wanted to frighten her enough to leave him alone so he could go. When Kathy saw the knife, she allegedly rushed at him and hit his arm, resulting in him accidentally cutting himself. A struggle followed. Ezekiel claimed he didn't know how the knife ended up in Kathy's neck. When he realized she was no longer breathing, he panicked. Instead of calling for help, he went home and asked John for help without fully explaining the situation. Although shocked, John agreed to help him hide the body. Together, they created a false story and stuck to it. Giovanni Candelario was staying in their apartment without anyone's knowledge, so he was not questioned by the police during the early investigation. When Kathy's body was found in a shallow grave, it was in such an advanced state of decomposition that DNA testing was necessary to confirm her identity. However, the forensic evidence contradicted Ezekiel's account of what happened. The medical examiner found more than a dozen knife wounds on Kathy, including a fatal cut to her throat, which was likely the cause of her death. This was clearly not an accident. It was a brutal and deliberate act. Despite the substantial evidence against him, Ezekiel maintained his innocence, claiming it was self-defense and that Kathy was accidentally hurt during their struggle. Investigators also discovered that the last message sent from Kathy's phone to her father was actually written and sent by Ezekiel, indicating he was trying to delay the discovery of her disappearance. During the trial, Ezekiel admitted that Kathy had been stalking him and trying to interfere with his new relationship. However, he denied that he had meant to hurt her. Giovanni, who provided important information, was not charged and remained a witness in the case. John Carpenter, who was Ezekiel's roommate and agreed to help investigators, received a suspended sentence for hiding evidence and lying in his testimony. Ezekiel Watkins pleaded not guilty to first-degree murder. However, Watkins was eventually convicted and sentenced to 27 years in prison. As a result, without the possibility of parole, Watkins remains incarcerated at the Washington Correctional Center in Shelton, Washington. Kathy Cho's life, radiant and full of promise, was stolen in 2010 by the one she once trusted, Ezekiel Watkins. His betrayal, a knife through her heart and her family's, left Renton, Washington, reeling for her Taiwanese immigrant parents, who cradled dreams of a better life. Kathy's loss was a wound deepened by their silent isolation. Her social media posts, a cry for freedom, led investigators to her killer but revealed the perils of her digital world. Renton's community, united in grief, lit candles at vigils and plastered her smile on flyers, refusing to let her fade. Giovanni Candelario's courage unveiled the truth, securing Ezekiel's 27-year sentence. Kathy's spirit endures in Renton High's quiet memorials and new safety lessons, whispering to us all, cherish those who shine, guard their trust, and hold fast to hope in the face of heartbreak. Hello again. True crime fans, we've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Sandra Cheskey. On November 17, 1973, in Gitchie Manitou, a small nature reserve in Iowa. On that day, 5 teenagers from South Dakota embarked on a trip there, planning to enjoy their Saturday together. Unaware that only one of them would return alive, Sandra Cheskey, born in 1960, was the youngest of 5 children. Her parents lost a son shortly after birth due to health problems. Her parents faced serious financial difficulties, which led to conflict. Eventually, the father left, leaving the mother to care for 3 sons and a daughter alone. She had to work hard to support her young children, while her mother completed her nursing studies The children stayed with their grandparents. By the time Sandra was 18 months old, they had all lived together for 3.5 years. Life on the farm with her grandparents was difficult. Mainly due to their age, it was difficult for them to manage 4 grandchildren. So the children were often left to fend for themselves. However, the grandparents were very involved with their grandchildren, and the children grew up in a loving environment. After finishing school, the children were reunited with their mother by the time Sandra started school. Her mother had started a new relationship and invited her partner to live with her. This led to conflict in the family as the children struggled to accept their stepfather, creating a tense atmosphere. The mother wanted to build her own life, but her children felt like a hindrance. Finally, she made a difficult decision. One day, when Sandra returned home from school, she learned that she and her brother Bill were going to be placed in different foster homes. This news shocked Sandra because she had not caused any problems and had tried to maintain good relationships with everyone in the family. Sandra felt that her mother was choosing her new partner over her children, which felt like another betrayal to her. The foster family she was placed with was dysfunctional. One day, Sandra told a social worker that her foster parents were abusive. Unfortunately, she was moved to another foster family that was also cold and uncaring. She did small chores around the house and felt like a servant. Eventually, she convinced her mother to let her return home. During this time, her brother, Bill, also returned home. He had previously lived with a police officer's family, where he learned strict discipline. The two brothers tried to behave and obey their parents, fearing that they would be sent back to foster care. However, after a while, Bill lost his temper, prompting his stepfather to send both him and Sandra to a strict boarding school in South Dakota. The rules there were harsh. When they returned home for the holidays, they begged their parents not to send them back and were filled with fear. In the summer of 1973, Sandra's family moved to a large farm outside of Sioux Falls. At the time, Sandra was just 13 years old. At a party with friends, Sandra met a boy named Roger Essam. Roger was a friend of one of Sandra's acquaintances, and after they met, they began talking and communicating regularly. Eventually, Roger asked her out on a date, and their relationship developed over time. Roger, 17, and Sandra, 13, are in a relationship. But Sandra looks older than her actual age, which is why Roger doesn't suspect her of being too young. However, Sandra is afraid of losing him and keeps her real age a secret. One day, while hanging out with Roger, Sandra meets his friend Stuart. Later, they also have another friend, Michael. The group, all of them come from respectable families and have no history of trouble with the law. Planning for the camping trip began when Roger and Michael met at school on November 16, 1973. They came up with the idea of visiting the Gitchie Manitou State Reservation in Lyon County, Iowa, where they could camp, have a campfire, and share stories. Since Stuart, the oldest of the group, had a driver's license and was allowed to drive his parents' car, they quickly agreed to go. By evening, the group knew about the plan and were looking forward to their weekend adventure. On November 17, 1973, Stuart said goodbye to her parents and set off with her younger sister Dana to meet up with the rest of their group. Meanwhile, Roger invited Sandra to join them on the trip, which she agreed to. Her brother Bill had originally planned to come along, but he canceled at the last minute. The group of 5 teenagers arrived at the park around 9 p.m. Although they were running a bit behind schedule due to the time spent gathering supplies for their hike, the conservation area was home to vast forests inhabited by deer, as well as a large river that offered numerous convenient camping spots. After exploring the area, they selected a suitable location to set up camp. As night began to fall, the teenagers lit a fire, sat around it, and sang songs together. Sandra sat next to her boyfriend, hugging him The group was having a wonderful time, completely oblivious to the deadly dangers that the night could bring. On November 18, 1973, a young couple visited the reserve, intending to take a relaxing walk and enjoy the scenery. However, during their walk, they stumbled upon something suspicious in the distance. As the man approached, he saw two lifeless bodies lying in the tall grass. He immediately reported the discovery to a park ranger and the police. About an hour later, police arrived, and after investigating, they discovered the bodies of two teenagers who had been killed by gunfire. The victims had suffered multiple gunshot wounds to their bodies, including their backs, heads, and chests. Police determined that the victims were killed at close range, giving them little chance of survival. The severity and proximity of the wounds led police to conclude that the attack was brutal and intentional. A fire was discovered at a nearby campsite, likely started by a group of teenagers. However, upon further investigation, two more bodies were found, both victims killed by gunshots. Police quickly called in forensic experts to examine the crime scene and collect evidence. The bodies were sent to the lab for autopsies, where the victims were quickly identified. All of the victims were from Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and included 15-year-old Michael Hadrath, 17-year-old Roger Essam, 18-year-old Stuart Bod, and 14-year-old Dana Bade. Stuart's sister. The news of this tragic event has left the relatives and friends of the victims in a state of shock. They were known for their calm and kind nature, focused on sports, and stayed away from any criminal activity or negative lifestyle. It seemed like they were just gathering to relax. But, unfortunately, their evening turned tragic due to the evil intentions of others. The relatives and friends of the victims cannot understand who could have committed such a heinous act or why, as the victims had no enemies or anyone who would wish them harm. Stuart's parents told police that the teens had gone to the campsite in a blue van, but the van was not found at the scene. The van's disappearance was a key clue. Forensic experts believed it could be a crucial lead in solving the case. During the autopsy, forensic experts discovered that the victims were killed with various caliber weapons, including 12, 16, and 20 caliber bullets. This led police to suspect that at least 3 people may have been involved in the massacre. The investigation had difficulty gathering valuable information about the perpetrators. The lack of evidence, including the murder weapon, the victim's car, and witness statements, hampered the case's progress. It is important to note that in the 1970s, the police did not have modern methods and technology. This may have contributed to the case's delay. However, when a police officer from the Sioux Falls station contacted the police handling the case, the police reported that a 13-year-old girl, Sandra Cheskey, came to the station and shared a shocking story. According to Sandra, after arriving at the reserve, her group of friends began setting up camp. As soon as they finished, a group of people emerged from the woods. They proceeded to attack Sandra's friends with guns. Sandra chose not to resist and was taken away from the campsite by the group. Sandra was then taken out of town, where she was raped, but was eventually released. She then tried to find her friends, but was unable to find them. The next morning, Sandra tried to contact her boyfriend, Roger, but her calls went unanswered. This left Sandra worried and panicked. It was not until she arrived at the police station that she received the heartbreaking news. Police have taken Sandra's statement. They want to find out what happened on the night of the massacre, specifically what she witnessed and who was involved. Police are trying to understand the motive behind the murder of the 4 young men and why the killers spared Sandra's life. Sandra explained that she and her friends had planned to camp at the reserve the day before. However, the group was delayed, and when they arrived, a series of events took place that led to this tragic incident. The group arrived at the reserve at around 22:30
Armed with a guitar and a small musical instrument set, they planned to stay there for the night and then return home. According to the Sandra, they set up camp, lit a fire, and rested around it. The teenagers planned to smoke marijuana and then go to sleep, however. Their relaxation did not last long. An hour later, they began to hear footsteps. The fire limited their vision, making it difficult for them to see what was going on around them. Then they heard a stranger yell. Roger said he was going to check as he stood up and walked away from the campfire. A loud gunshot rang out. Roger collapsed to the ground. The group of young men immediately panicked. A second shot rang out, causing Stewart to fall to the ground next to his friend. Then came several more shots. Sandra then witnessed 3 men appear, all armed with handguns. The rest of Sandra's group quickly took cover behind trees and bushes. However, they were soon apprehended by the men, strangers who claimed to be police officers working to combat organized crime and illegal substances. The men implied that they had seen the teenagers smoking marijuana. Although they claimed to be law enforcement officers, they were not wearing police uniforms and did not display badges or identification. Sandra was very scared and complied with the criminals' demands. She did not dare to resist because she was afraid of the consequences of disobeying. On the contrary, Michael did not comply with the criminals' demands, so the men pointed their pistols at him. Michael instinctively raised his hands, but the attackers fired, seriously injuring Michael. Meanwhile, Roger and Stewart were still lying on the ground. The attackers then asked Sandra about a blue truck. Then the attackers led Michael, Donna, and Sandra toward the parking lot. After arriving at Stewart's blue van, an attacker asked Sandra to unlock the car, which she did. The attacker then got into the driver's seat and they drove away together. During the ride, the attacker talked to Sandra and assured her that her friends would be okay because the guns used were not real guns, but special tranquilizer guns that put them to sleep. Sandra found this explanation believable, thinking that her friends were simply unconscious and that they would all be reunited after everything was over. The attacker took Sandra to an abandoned house. His accomplice's car followed behind. The attacker told Sandra to stay in the car, and he got out to discuss something with the other men. One of the men then approached the car, opened the passenger door, and roughly grabbed her by the neck, pulling her out of the car. She was then brutally attacked. The attacker then got into the car and asked for Sandra's home address before dropping her off. The incident ended around 4:00 a.m. before releasing Sandra from the car. He threatened to harm her family if she told anyone about the incident. However, Sandra went to the police station to report the incident. The police were confused as to why the perpetrator released Sandra, even driving her home. Despite knowing that she could expose them to the police, Sandra was the only person who could help find the 3 killers. So she worked closely with the police. They brought in an artist to create composite sketches of the suspects based on Sandra's descriptions. However, the criminals did not mention their real names to Sandra. The attacks happened at night, making it difficult for Sandra to see their faces. Therefore, the composite sketches may not be completely reliable. The only detail Sandra could provide with certainty was a description of the perpetrator's vehicle, which was a Chevy pickup from the early 1970s. After meeting Sandra, Stewart's car was discovered near a truck stop in Sioux Falls the following day. Forensic experts conducted a thorough examination and search of the car, looking for any fingerprints or other evidence that the perpetrator may have left behind. Unfortunately, the search did not yield any valuable information to aid the investigation. Police are investigating the location of the house where the criminal took Sandra, hoping to find clues. Data shows that this abandoned building is within 70 kilometers of the city. Search teams have been mobilized to locate the house as Thanksgiving approaches. Public pressure increases, and search teams are forced to speed up the search. The presence of 3 armed criminals capable of violent crimes against children, makes people feel unsafe in their own homes. Sandra also joined in the search of the abandoned house. She also made regular visits to the police station to identify potential suspects based on composite sketches. Despite all their efforts, the case still hasn't yielded any leads. Sandra was placed under police guard at her home on Thanksgiving Day for her own safety, as she was the only witness who could identify the perpetrators. The police were concerned that the perpetrators might target Sandra after discovering that she had spoken to the police about them. On November 29, 1973, Sandra and the police discovered the White House with broken windows. It was the house where she had been brutally raped by a stranger. Sandra suddenly ran up to one of the police officers and threw her arms around him, terrified as the horrific memories of that night came flooding back to her. As she stepped back, she noticed a blue pickup truck on the road. Sandra pointed to the vehicle, recognizing it as the one used by the criminals on the night of the massacre. The police quickly stopped the pickup truck, and a man got out. He was identified as 29-year-old Alan Fryer. Sandra was horrified when she realized that this was the man who had been present at the attack. Alan was immediately arrested and taken to the police station. Alan initially denied ever having been to the sanctuary and had nothing to do with the deaths of the children in the case, claiming that he could never hurt children. However, when pressed by the police, Alan began to break down. He eventually admitted that he and 20-year-old David Fryer and 21-year-old James Fryer had indeed been to the sanctuary on the evening of the incident. Although he claimed not to have participated in the murders, he admitted that David and James had killed the children. Alan disputed Sandra's initial testimony, instead saying that the teenagers had attacked them, causing them to attack back in self-defense. Alan's story seems too unbelievable. Alan, David, and James were 3 brothers from a family of 7 sons and 6 daughters. They all lived on a farm where they developed a passion for animals, hunting, and farming. Their father, a strict disciplinarian, made his children work long hours on the farm from a young age. Disobedience to him would result in harsh punishments, earning him a reputation as a fearsome figure. The daughters of the family were known to be calm and quiet, while the sons were notorious troublemakers. Alan, the eldest, had a charm that allowed him to make many friends, but friends said he was dishonest, often exaggerating and telling false stories from a young age. Alan showed disturbing personality traits, while David, the second oldest, was apparently docile and quiet, often yielding to his older brother Alan. However, his younger brother James had a tendency towards criminal behavior from an early age. James's troubled path began at the age of 9. The 3 brothers were extremely close and protective of each other, never allowing one another to be harmed. As they grew older, their involvement in criminal activities intensified, with Alan often taking the lead and encouraging his brothers to participate in illicit deeds within the city. David and James were always by Alan's side, willingly engaging in these unlawful acts. This pattern of behavior ultimately led to David's arrest in 1967, at the age of 16, for recklessly driving through the city and firing a gun at random targets. The news did not come as a shock to the city's residents, as the 3 brothers were known to carry weapons and had a history of theft and robbery. Witnesses said they often ventured into the woods to hunt illegally when they were not committing other crimes. The 3 brothers often got into trouble, but they showed no remorse for their actions. 6 years after the shooting in the city, a tragic event occurred in the reserve. After a conversation with Alan, the police attempted to arrest David and James. David was later found at his residence, while James was in custody for robbery at the time. Notably, James had been released from prison shortly before the massacre. Sandra came to identify the suspects after they were arrested. Despite their denials, she was able to identify each of the men who had killed her friend. The police continued to question them to piece together the events of that night. It was discovered that James had been released from prison on November 18, and that all three had decided to go hunting. Each had their own guns, 12, 16, and 20 caliber. While hunting, they accidentally discovered a fire in the forest and saw some teenagers smoking marijuana. The three brothers decided to take the drugs from the teenagers and headed to their camp. Roger was the first to discover them and stood up to confront them. He was instantly killed with a shotgun minutes after the massacre. Sandra and Alan got into a pickup truck and drove away. Stuart, badly injured, tried to stand up, then fell and died from his injuries. Dana and Michael were also killed. All three brothers were then arrested and waited behind bars for the trial to begin. Sandra expected James to be charged with rape, among other crimes, however. The judges decided that a murder charge would be enough to punish the offenders. Effectively ignoring Sandra's traumatic experiences during the trial, David Fryer confessed to the crimes and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Alan Fryer was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to 4 terms of life in prison without parole on June 20, 1974. Alan was initially held in the Leon County Jail before being transferred to a maximum security prison. Coincidentally, Alan and James were both held at the facility. The brothers secretly communicated and soon hatched an escape plan. One night, Alan and James escaped from the prison in the early morning. Their escape went undetected for several hours, until one of the police discovered their empty cells. News of the brothers' escape spread quickly, causing a nationwide sensation and prompting a massive manhunt. Sandra, the prosecution's main witness, was particularly concerned about her safety after learning about the escape. She believed that the brothers would retaliate against her, so the police provided her with armed guards. She lived in fear for days until the fugitives were finally apprehended in Gitchie, Wyoming. James's trial took place in December 1974. He was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. Sandra spent a long time healing from the trauma she had experienced, including the brutal rape and brutal murder of her friends. Unfortunately, she faced further suffering due to the public backlash, with many blaming her for the incident. Her classmates shunned and bullied her, making her teenage years even more difficult, especially since she had already had a troubled and unsupportive childhood. As Sandra grew older, she persevered and rebuilt her life. At age 26, she got married, had children, and eventually became a grandmother. Years later, in 2016, she decided to share her story by writing a book. Hey detectives, welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Carly Ryan. Carly Ryan was born on January 31, 1992. In Australia, her mother, Sonia Ryan, was 20 years old at the time and raised her on her own. They lived in Stirling, a suburb of Adelaide in South Australia. She and her mother have a close relationship, always being a strong support for each other. Carly was a girl who always cared about others. She is also fascinated by many different subcultures and shares her passion for music with those close to her, along with her in-person friendships. She has many relationships on social media. She enjoyed spending time on platforms like MySpace and Vampire Freaks, where she interacted with others who shared her interest in subcultures such as goth on MySpace. Carly is known as SYSL. Her posts seem engaging and fit this nickname. Many of the photos she shared featured women tied with ropes or people using illegal drugs. Her profile lists interests such as drug use, smoking, drinking, music, intimate relations, and attending concerts. However, most of these hobbies were exaggerated or entirely fabricated and didn't reflect her real life. At one point, Carly's friend Ashley introduced her to a young man named Brandon Kane. Brandon was born in the United States but lived in Victoria, Australia. He claims to be 20 years old and says his hobby is playing the guitar. Initially, he had been communicating with Ashley as he was romantically interested in her. Their conversations were mostly casual, though occasionally they touched on more personal topics. Ashley disliked these intimate discussions, which caused their communication to taper off. However, when she posted a photo of herself with Carly, he reached out again and asked for Carly's email address. Shortly after, he sent Carly his first message after a while of exchanging messages. Carly fell in love with her new acquaintance, Brandon. He matched her idea of the perfect guy. Their conversation quickly turned romantic. Moving from messages to phone calls, the two stayed in touch for over a year, and as time passed, their feelings for each other grew stronger. Carly became completely captivated by Brandon and believed he was the love of her life. She even told all her friends and her mother about him. However, her mother, Sonia, was cautious about this relationship, recognizing the potential risks of such communication. It's unclear whether Sonia knew his age, but she suspected that he might be completely different from the person he claimed to be. At times, Sonia monitored her daughter, especially when Carly was chatting with Brandon. She had previously accessed Carly's MySpace account. The conversations there did not arouse any suspicion, even quite innocent, however. What shocked her was the photos found there. Because they were very private in nature, Sonia quickly expressed her concerns to her daughter, Carly, but she dismissed them. Although she herself sometimes found Brandon's behavior strange, some of his actions really made her insecure. Any parent would be alarmed by a 20-year-old man communicating with a 14-year-old girl. Not only was there an age difference, the demands he made on Carly were even more unusual. For instance, one day, Brandon asked Carly to kiss her friend Ashley and record it on video. Carly agreed because she really liked Brandon. However, Ashley was more cautious and wondered if the video might end up on an untrustworthy website. Her concerns grew when Carly began communicating with a man named Shane, who claimed to be Brandon's adoptive father. Like Brandon, he also had a MySpace account. Shane described himself as an honest security guard and a former military officer. He also claimed to have worked as a bodyguard for Marilyn Manson. It seemed that he and Brandon shared not only an interest in music, but also in underage girls. He frequently called Carly on the phone, even when she was spending time with her friends, and asked them inappropriate questions. For instance, he would ask if they were bisexual or if they enjoyed kissing other girls. Ashley felt uncomfortable with Shane's behavior and eventually confided in Carly about it. However, she reacted negatively, leading to an argument between the two friends. Despite this, she was eager to meet Brandon in person. The meeting was arranged for January 26, 2007. However, at the last minute, he announced that he could not come and said that his father, Shane, would come to see her. She happily agreed to this. At this time, Shane has acted as a father figure in Carly's life. Her mother, Sonia, was initially hesitant about allowing a stranger into their home, but Carly was adamant. In January 2007, Shane, a man who appeared to be around 50 years old, arrived at their house. In a light blue car, he was dressed in a security guard's uniform and, for some reason, quickly managed to gain Sonia's trust. Not only does Sonia allow Shane into her home, she also allows Carly to go shopping with him on his trip to the mall. He bought Carly a lot of things. Most of the gifts seemed normal, but some raised suspicions. In total, he spent about $260. However, this generosity was a ploy, as he used the opportunity to secretly watch Carly undress while she tried on clothes during Carly's birthday party. She spent much of her time with her ex-boyfriends, which greatly upset Shane. He felt that she wasn't giving him enough attention. Later in the evening, he managed to gain Carly's favor and went for a walk with her and her friend, Rihanna. While walking, he tried to force two girls to kiss. Rihanna refused, which caused Carly to burst into tears and run back to the house. One night, when Carly was sleeping, something strange happened. Shane climbed into her bed and whispered that he loved her very much and that he wouldn't let anything harm her. The next morning, Cho recounted the entire event to her mother, Sonia, immediately. Her mother confronted Shane to clarify matters. Sonia asked her daughter whether he had touched her, and she answered yes, however. She did not want Brandon to know about this. She even asked her mother to speak with Shane and resolve the situation peacefully. However, Sonia was furious. She decided to cut all ties between Carly, Brandon, and Shane not long after. She sent Shane a letter demanding that he stop contacting her daughter and threatened to involve the police. If he didn't comply, Shane's reply was full of anger. He acknowledged there was some truth to what Sonia had accused him of and warned her that he intended to sue her. Although Shane is no longer at their house, Sonia knows that she and her daughter, Carly, are still in danger. There's also a chance he'll try to get back in touch with Carly. However, at this stage, Sonia had no idea that the man who appeared in her house wasn't Shane. He wasn't a security guard, a former soldier, or even the father of someone named Brandon, in fact. Both Shane and Brandon's identities are fabrications, created by the same person, Gary Francis Newman. But who is he? The woman, known to Australian media as Christine, found her home had become a prison after marrying Gary. He sought to take complete control of her life. Christine said he would often beat her for seemingly trivial reasons, such as wanting to go shopping with friends or being a few minutes late. These would send him into a rage. Christine worked at a strip club, and her husband, Gary, took all the money she earned when she refused to return to work. He forced her to go back one day. When she mentioned she planned to go shopping with a friend, he violently dragged her into a room. He pinned her down and began beating her until she lost consciousness. Afterward, he left her lying on the floor. Miraculously, she managed to crawl to the front door, where Gary's mother happened to arrive, shocked by her condition. His mother immediately called a doctor. During the examination, the doctor asked Christine if her husband, Gary, had assaulted her. However, Gary's presence intimidated her into silence. He even squeezed her hand so hard that he broke several of her fingers. Eventually, she found the courage to escape and relocate to Melbourne. Gary seemed unbothered by her departure. He felt free and began to act on his instincts. He became interested in adult films featuring women in schoolgirl uniforms. It wasn't long before he had the idea to make his dark fantasies a reality before pursuing Carly. Gary has tried many times to get acquainted with other girls, each time assuming a new identity. Amazingly, between 2002 and 2003, he created over 200 MySpace accounts. During this period, he tried to establish contact with a 14-year-old girl in the United States, referring to her as a princess and even calling her his wife, using the pseudonym Nesh. He also spoke to another girl in Singapore and even flew there to meet her. However, she deceived him and did not show up, which deeply affected his mental health. He confided in a friend, saying the girl would pay for this betrayal. Gary's obsession soon spiraled out of control. At one point, he contemplated getting his own daughter, who was under 13 years old, to lure her into having intimate relations with him. Thankfully, he never acted on this horrific plan when it came to Carly. He hoped she would accept his advances and envisioned starting a new life with her. He even told his colleagues about his plans to move to Adelaide. However, when his intentions were exposed, he realized his dream was slipping away. Consumed by anger, he decided to seek revenge. He wanted Carly to suffer. That became his dark goal. During February, Gary and Carly remained in contact while impersonating Brandon. He hinted at Shane's presence, and she agreed to meet. His task was to find a young man to play the role of Brandon. He was well prepared for this plan. As he had previously adopted a 17-year-old boy, this teenager was chosen to impersonate Brandon. That month, Gary and his adopted son traveled to Adelaide. Meanwhile, Carly lied to her mother, Sonia, claiming she would be spending the night at a friend's house. Perhaps feeling guilty about the lie, she hugged her mother several times before leaving and told her she loved her. She then exited the house through the back door. She was met on the street by a man she knew as Shane and the teenager pretending to be Brandon. They then visited Port Elliot, a well-known tourist destination in South Australia. They walked around the town and eventually stopped at a local bay, where Gary gave Carly illegal drugs. After 10 p.m., in a secluded area of the bay, taking advantage of Carly's unconscious state, he knocked her face down into the water and then attacked her. His adopted son assisted by holding Carly down. Then, Gary struck her several times on the head, causing her to lose consciousness. Eventually, he and his adopted son threw her into the water, intending to drown her, and she did not survive. The next morning, a woman named Kim Griffin discovered Carly's lifeless body, unable to find anyone nearby to assist. She ran to the closest parking lot, where she encountered a fisherman named Ian Slate. Ian agreed to help, and together they pulled Carly's body onto the shore. After checking for a pulse, they realized she was already dead. Minutes later, Kim contacted the police and emergency services. On February 20, 2007, Carly was officially declared deceased. An autopsy later revealed that she had suffered at least 19 injuries, including head trauma. Additionally, her body had multiple cuts and scratches. Traces of cannabinoids were found in her blood. Experts determined that she had died shortly before Kim found her. Her mother, Sonia, was devastated by the tragedy. She struggled to understand how her daughter had ended up in such a remote location, far from home. CCTV footage from Port Elliot revealed that Carly was accompanied by 2 men. In one video, the 3 were seen near the Crown Hotel. In another, near a fast food restaurant. Investigators have spoken to several witnesses. One witness said, a man asked him where to buy drinks. He directed them toward the bay. A supermarket cashier, who sold the man cigarettes around 9 p.m., said he asked the same question. Witnesses described Carly as goth or emo. Several people interviewed mentioned seeing a light blue car with Victorian plates. The car was parked on a cliff, and on the control panel there is something that looks like a security guard's card. Investigators reviewed Carly's last phone calls to identify who she had contacted before her death. One number was registered in Melbourne and the other in Adelaide. Despite efforts, the police were unable to identify the owners of these phone numbers. However, geolocation data provided crucial insights. Some calls were made from Euchreville, a suburb of Adelaide located just a few kilometers from Carly's home, where a trailer park housed people living in their vehicles. When investigators visited the area, the light blue car with Victorian plates was no longer there, however. Several residents confirmed seeing the car and the individuals inside it. CCTV footage helped identify the car and its number plate, which provided crucial information. Tracing the number plate led investigators to a house on the Mornington Peninsula, south of Melbourne. The house was owned by a 48-year-old man named Gary Francis Newman. The wanted car was parked in front of the house, making Gary the prime suspect in Carly's murder. When police entered the house, they found Gary sitting at a computer, chatting with a 14-year-old girl from Western Australia. He was once again pretending to be Brandon. It had been just 11 days since Carly's body was discovered in the bay, and he was already targeting another victim during a search of the house. Investigators uncovered numerous items linked to his criminal activities. Notebooks revealed details of 200 fake identities Gary used to communicate with underage girls. Evidence also indicated that he had been engaging in these predatory actions for a long time. One particularly chilling note read, "Rest in peace, Carly Ryan." Police also found sand from Port Elliot on Gary's shoes. Unfortunately, by the time of his arrest, he had already deleted many messages from his profile, and most of the messages between him and Carly were lost. However, recordings of phone calls with Carly were recovered from his computer, including conversations where he pretended to be Brandon. The last exchange between he and she took place shortly before her death, during which they arranged to meet on the 19th, when experts compared Gary's DNA to samples found on Carly's clothing. They determined that the samples matched. This proves that he had contact with her and was at the beach on the day of the murder, even though the evidence is very clear. He maintained his innocence. He tried to blame his adopted son. However, the boy gave a completely different account, accusing Gary of being responsible for everything. As a result, both were arrested. Their trial lasted nearly 3 years. Throughout the trial, Gary continued to deny his guilt, as he had been doing for months. He shifted the blame to his son, insulted him, and accused him of lying. He also claimed that the authorities and the media had conspired against him. While in prison, he wrote several letters to his relatives, asking them to help him and support his alibi. However, instead of helping him, his family reported his requests to the police until the trial ends. Carly's identity remains absolutely secret. The only publicly known details were about her personality. Initially, the media portrayed her as a troubled teenager, and it was reported that she had wanted a relationship with an older man. This information caused the case to receive nationwide attention. The first court hearing occurred on October 20, 2009, at the Supreme Court of South Australia. Just before the trial began, Justice Trish Kelly declared that evidence, such as conversations between Gary and other teenage girls, would not be admissible. She would only admit evidence that was directly relevant to Carly's case. The prosecution argued that Gary and his adopted son jointly managed the profiles of Brandon and Shane. However, the son's defense claimed he merely helped his father cover up the crime. For a long time, Gary and his legal team tried to shift all blame for Carly's death onto his adopted son. However, during a court appearance in January 2010, he shocked everyone by changing his stance. He claimed neither he nor his son was responsible for her death. He asserted that he never had feelings for Carly and describes their relationship as similar to that between a stepfather and daughter. Furthermore, Gary says that he has no feelings for anyone, as he is asexual, meaning he is not interested in intimacy. However, this was only his testimony in court, according to Gary. The only person who had feelings for Carly was his adopted son. Gary claims he pretended to be Shane. While his adopted son played the role of Brandon, he explained that he had been obsessed with social media for a long time, which he attributed to his bipolar disorder and obsessive-compulsive disorder. He stated that he fabricated the situation as part of a study, which he intended to use for writing a book about social media manipulation. Although he denies causing Carly's death, he admits to taking her away from her home to explain his actions. Gary said that Carly and his adopted son had attended a party in town, and only then did he meet them. Finally, he and his son returned home. Leaving Carly alone on the beach, he hoped that this testimony would have his charges reduced to manslaughter, suggesting that Carly had harmed herself. However, the jury did not accept this testimony. As a result, Gary Francis Newman was convicted of Carly's murder. On January 21, 2012, a judge sentenced Gary to life in prison without the possibility of parole until he had served 29 years. All charges against his adopted son, who was a minor at the time, were dropped. The son's identity was never revealed. Following the trial, Sonia Ko founded the Carly Ryan Foundation, a nonprofit focused on promoting online safety following the tragic loss of her daughter Carly. Her goal was not to stop young people from using the internet, but to ensure they could do so safely over time. The foundation's efforts led to the introduction of a new law addressing grooming and cybercrimes, particularly cases where offenders concealed their age and identity. Sonia regularly gives educational presentations to schools in Australia and New Zealand. She is a symbol of resilience for many families and always try our best to prevent similar situations from happening again. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Christine Belford. On the morning of February 11, 2013, an unknown man opened fire as he approached the victims near the entrance to the courthouse. killing 2 women. The local patrol received a radio message about the shooting, urging all available police to rush to the scene. When they arrived, the officers found 2 bodies on the floor near the entrance, covered with a sheet to shield the victims from public view. The police took over the case, and soon, a thorough investigation was underway to piece together the chain of events. Teams were assembled to search the courthouse and the surrounding area. This is where the police discovered their first clues. They believe the attacker is closely related to Christine Belelffords, who had been threatened for many years. On September 9, 2007, at approximately 9 p.m., 6 years before the murders, a police officer received a call from a woman. She reported that her 3 daughters had been kidnapped and alleged that her ex-husband, David Matuszewicz, the father of the children, was involved. Christine Belelffords was the one who contacted the police. She was concerned that her ex-husband's mother, Lenore Matuszewicz, was involved. Christine informed the police that on August 26, 2007, David, along with his mother, had picked up their 3 daughters to take them to Disneyland in Orlando, Florida. Although Christine and David were divorced, he had joint custody of the children. He had never been violent or shown any serious problems in the past, so Christine felt comfortable letting him take the children. They left in their trailer for the trip, but weeks passed without any contact from David. He had completely disappeared and never returned the children to her. He also ignored her calls, which worried her greatly. The police tried to reassure Christine, saying that the children would return after spending time with their father. However, they also considered the possibility that something had delayed their trip. The police attempted to contact David, but were unable to because his phone was disconnected. They then looked into David's background and family and discovered that he owned a medical optics clinic, where he had met Christine when she was hired. Christine had been married before and had a daughter, Catherine, from a previous marriage. However, this did not stop Christine from developing a relationship with David. David quickly fell in love with Christine, and they began dating. Their relationship progressed rapidly, and it seemed like they were headed for marriage. However, David was hesitant to introduce Christine to his family because he was worried about how they would react to her past, especially the fact that she had a daughter from a previous relationship. He was concerned that his strict parents would not accept her. It was not until their wedding in 2001 that he introduced Christine to his parents, and surprisingly, the meeting went well. After their marriage, the couple bought a house in Middleton, New Jersey, and later welcomed 3 daughters. However, everyday challenges began to strain their relationship, leading to frequent arguments. David thought that moving away might help, so they relocated to Wilmington, Delaware, where his parents offered to support them. Unfortunately, this change did not improve their situation. In fact, it only made things worse. Christine felt that David was unhelpful and did not support her in caring for their children and managing household chores. His parents were difficult, often rude to her, and they attempted to control her within the household. Overwhelmed by the situation, Christine decided to file for divorce in 2006, which led to a tense custody battle. David claimed that Christine was a bad mother and had mental health problems. However, her friends and family disagreed. The judge ordered a psychiatric evaluation, which found that Christine was mentally stable. In contrast, the evaluation identified several mental health issues for David, who was stressed and depressed, occasionally lost touch with reality, and struggled to control his anger. Ultimately, custody was awarded to Christine, while David was granted visitation rights on weekends and holidays. Christine is now responsible for raising their 4 daughters, and David has moved in with his parents. David comes from a close-knit family. His father, a weapons collector, was previously a police officer but was fired after 4 years for misconduct. He later worked at the post office and drove a bus. David's mother, Lenore, works at a nursing home. At first glance, their family seems close-knit and normal. However, Christine told the police that David's family was obsessed with children and posed a danger to her daughters. She pleaded with the police to intervene for the safety of her children. Some people also voiced suspicions that the family was not normal. It became clear that David's parents were actually selfish, controlling, and aggressive. When the court decided that the children should live with Christine, Lenore became angry and began manipulating her son to pursue a custody battle, employing unethical tactics without hesitation. The police grew suspicious, particularly when Christine went to the police station to present custody papers. Although Christine had been granted custody rights, David and his family were determined to prove that she was unfit as a mother. David continued to seek full custody using dishonest tactics. This alarmed the police, whom Christine contacted. She informed them that David was accusing her of mental illness and requested a further evaluation. This was just the beginning of a series of lies. The police checked David's credit card transactions to locate him and discovered that the last payment was made on August 26, the day David left the house with the children. He had wisely chosen not to use the card afterward to avoid being tracked. Given these circumstances, the police had to classify the case as a kidnapping, which prompted the mobilization of the entire local police force to track the movements of David and the children. The police carefully recorded his phone number and car details. However, they did not realize that this was just the beginning of a multi-year investigation in American crime history. More than 3,000 kilometers south of Christine's residence in Hidalgo, Texas, her children were in a car with their father. The children that Christine and the entire city police force were desperately trying to find. David was driving with his mother in the passenger seat. They drove along a regular highway until they turned and headed toward the Mexican border. About a kilometer from the end of U.S. jurisdiction, the fugitives' car stopped at a checkpoint. The officer took their passports, asked how many people were in the car, and noticed children playing in the trailer, laughing and having fun. As everything seemed normal, the officer had no reason to be suspicious. He checked the papers, returned them to David, and allowed the car to pass without issue. David and Lenore had prepared fake passports for everyone, including their 3 children, enabling them to leave the United States without any problems. They had planned the kidnapping of the children a year in advance. First, the police went to David's house and searched it. They found no one inside. Both David and his mother, Lenore, were missing. In the fireplace, they discovered burned documents, including a marriage contract with Christine, divorce papers, and bank statements from New Zealand and Canada. Investigations revealed that shortly before their disappearance, Lenore had bought a trailer for $82,000. In addition, David had sold his business for just $650. He then took out a $250,000 loan in Christine's name, and the way he did this astounded the police. Now, the fugitives, along with their 3 children, could be anywhere in the world. The investigation into the kidnapping dragged on for months without any clues. During this time, there was no contact from David or the children, as if they had completely disappeared. Meanwhile, David's father and his sister, Amy Gonzalez, claimed during police questioning that they had no knowledge of David and Lenore's plans. However, police found their testimony unconvincing due to numerous inconsistencies. Furthermore, shortly after the children were kidnapped, David's family bought a house and moved to Ed Couch, Texas, about 30 kilometers from the Mexican border. David's family also transferred large sums of money between their accounts, raising suspicions that David and the children may have fled there. Police wondered if David's father and sister had been in contact with him and Lenore. They believed that David's entire family might have been involved in the case, but this theory needed to be thoroughly investigated and proven. The search for the missing girls went international as U.S. authorities sought assistance from the police in Mexico. The media reported extensively on the kidnapping of the 3 girls. The FBI soon received information that David had bought a house and was hiding in a small town in Mexico. A police team was quickly formed to arrest him, but when they arrived, he was gone. It seemed that he had been alerted to the police presence and had fled. However, The FBI had obtained a fake passport for David, indicating that he had moved to Costa Rica. At this point, the investigation hit another roadblock, as they were unable to find him for the next 16 months. Leads to David, Lenore, and the 3 children had completely dried up. Christine was devastated by not knowing the fate of her children, and it is hard to imagine the extent of her suffering during this time. Christy began to struggle with depression due to the stress, and her condition worsened, but she was determined not to give up. During this time, the FBI received a new lead. They intercepted calls from David's sister Amy's cell phone, which led them to a short call to South America, specifically to a town called Catarina in Nicaragua. The local police were notified, and all checkpoints along the way were alerted. A search for David, Lenore, and the 3 children began. It was discovered that they were living somewhere in the woods. They were using a trailer with Delaware state plates. The challenge arose because this type of trailer is very common in Nicaragua, making it difficult to locate the specific vehicle. As a result, the search process was significantly delayed. The entire police force was urgently working to locate the missing children, as their safety was at stake. For 2 years, there was no information about the 3 girls. On March 13, 2009, a police officer in Nicaragua stopped a car during a routine inspection. The officer was aware of the ongoing search and knew that a suspect was using a similar trailer. He noticed that the people in the car resembled those the police were looking for. A man named David was driving, with his adult daughter in the passenger seat. When the officer asked David to get out of the car, he produced a fake driver's license. Despite David's protests, the officer insisted that he get out of the car, resulting in David's arrest. That same night, Christine boarded a plane to Nicaragua. After 2 years of separation, she finally had the chance to see her daughters. However, her children had no idea how much they were wanted. At the time of the kidnapping, they were too young to understand what was happening. Their father, David, convinced them that Christine had abandoned them and never loved them. This was only the beginning of the lies and cruelty that Christine faced. After his arrest, David was charged with kidnapping and fraud. He eventually pleaded guilty to these charges and was sentenced to 2 years in prison, followed by 5 years of probation. His mother, Lenora, also pleaded guilty to aiding and abetting and was sentenced to 18 months in prison. The return of the 3 girls to their mother was widely reported by the local media. Christine noted that the girls were thin, gaunt, and frightened, and they all had dental problems. During their time away from home, they suffered from untreated autism. All 3 girls were plagued by nightmares and required rehabilitation and psychological support. Outraged by their condition, Christine took action to revoke David's parental rights to prevent future abductions. She also filed a lawsuit for emotional distress on behalf of her daughters, intending to use the money to rehabilitate them after their traumatic experience in the woods. The public supported her. Christine, overwhelmed by the pain she faced, was unable to work. As the situation escalated, Christine's ex-husband David was furious at losing parental rights and not being able to see his children. Due to a new lawsuit, he also ran out of money to hire a lawyer. He refused to pay Christine any money and declared bankruptcy. As a result, Christine withdrew the lawsuit, realizing that she would not be able to get any money from him for her children's medical treatment. She asked David and his family to leave her and her children alone. Although David and his family agreed to her request, they had no intention of doing so. Soon, David began plotting his revenge. On December 22, 2009, he sent a letter from prison to his sister Amy, stating that he had stopped pretending to be a good person. While Christine's children were recovering during their father's imprisonment, they began rehabilitation and received dental care. During this time, a woman named Cindy contacted Christine through social media. She inquired about the family's health and mentioned that she had met David, which helped them bond over their shared experiences with him. They quickly formed a strong friendship and kept in touch. Christine shared important updates about her daughters, including their academic achievements, sports activities, and the names of their schools. They even exchanged photos. Cindy expressed her support, which seemed genuine, as Christine's story had garnered national attention, and she received much support after David's sentencing. Recently, alarming allegations began circulating online on a website. Lenora posted a detailed list of allegations claiming that Christine had abused her eldest daughter, bullied her, and imposed moral oppression on the child. It was reported that the children lived in appalling conditions, were forced to fight a dog for food, and were made to eat on dirty floors. There were also allegations that Christine intended to sell her daughters for $50,000 each. Many people who knew Christine were shocked, as she was considered the epitome of a good mother. Fortunately, only a few took the news seriously. Most believed that someone was trying to discredit Christine, and that she would never allow such a thing to happen to her children. Christine realized that David and his family were trying to sabotage her in order to take away her parental rights. If successful, his relatives could gain custody of the children, allowing him to stay in touch with them. David was so obsessed with his plan to gain custody that he was constantly looking for ways to get revenge on his ex-wife, Christine. However, Christine could not understand how he could have orchestrated this from prison, where he had no access to the internet. The explanation was simple. One of his family members had supported him. It was eventually revealed that his mother, Lenora, and sister Amy were the ones who helped him. From there, the online bullying and terror against Christine, an innocent mother, began. In a letter from David, who was in prison, to his sister Amy, he gave specific instructions on how to spread damaging stories about Christine. He used encryption to avoid detection. It was Amy who initiated the anonymous emails to Christine's friends, neighbors, and acquaintances. She even shared false information with the school that Christine's daughters attended, intentionally damaging Christine's reputation. These lies also spread to the church that Christine attended on Sundays. The rumors affected her and caused her great distress, forcing Christine to leave the Sunday school where she worked. Christine taught the Bible to elementary school children, but she was worried that the online rumors and her presence could endanger the children. Her ex-husband's family tried to portray her as a threat to the children. Meanwhile, Christine did her best to protect her young daughters from the chaos. At the time, her eldest daughter from her first marriage, Catherine, was 16 years old. She stood by her mother and sisters, vehemently denying all allegations of harassment and abuse. As time passed since David and Lenore's mother-in-law were incarcerated, Christine began to feel increasingly uneasy. On September 16, 2010, Lenore Matusiewicz was released, leaving Christine even more afraid of the woman. She relied on a court order prohibiting David's family from coming near her children or her property, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. She confided her worries to only a few close friends, including her pen pal Cindy, who supported her. On March 20, 2011, Christine's friend sent her a disturbing video. In it, a woman is seen watching Christine and her children from a car parked near their home. The woman had been spotted watching Christine's family home on several occasions. A video titled, "Mom, Don't Hurt Me," was later posted to social media on March 20, 2011. While there is nothing overly inappropriate in the video, there are moments during the walk where Christine appears to be distressed. The creator of the video seems to imply that Christine is harming her children, but in reality, she is struggling with anxiety. Christine is under increasing pressure, and there are people trying to break her emotionally. Despite the difficult circumstances, she remained strong for her children, especially with the support of her new partner, Gerald, as she had no one else to turn to. In December 2011, David's father, Thomas Matus, unexpectedly arrived at Christine's home. She was not home at the time, leaving the girls alone. They were terrified to see their grandfather at the door, banging on the windows and doors. The children still remembered the traumatic experience of being kidnapped and the painful moments they endured while with their father and grandmother in the woods. The eldest daughter, Catherine, took charge and led her sisters to a secluded part of the house to hide, although they were still very scared. At that time, Christine's new boyfriend, Gerald, arrived at the house. After a brief argument, Gerald succeeded in forcing Thomas to leave. It was clear that David's father was trying to avoid attracting the attention of the police. However, the situation had a significant psychological impact. From that point on, Christine's family felt unsafe in their own home. They installed surveillance cameras around the house, set up an alarm system, and placed 3 guard dogs at each door. In the older girl's bedroom, they even left a knife for self-defense. Despite these measures, Christine's parents continued to come and monitor the house. To further protect Christine and her children, they felt the need to increase security, but nothing seemed to alleviate their fears. Christine eventually decided to sell her house and move away, finding a place where she and her children could be safe from detection. She put the house up for sale and began looking for a new home, far from the city. Christine confided her worries and plans to move to her pen pal, Cindy, but she did not know that Cindy was David's girlfriend. David not only communicated with his sister Amy, but also with his mother Lenore and his girlfriend Cindy. These individuals were involved in organizing the dissemination of rumors online that affected Christine. Cindy gathered information directly from Christine and shared it with Amy. Despite the claims of how cruel David was, Cindy continued to date him, had feelings for him, and supported him during David's time in prison when she visited him. Cindy eagerly awaited his release, but while he was incarcerated, she wasted no time in gaining Christine's trust at his request. This allowed her to learn all about the address of Christine's house and her family's intentions. Cindy knew the location of the surveillance cameras and their coverage, as well as the plans to sell the property. 4 months before David was released from prison, his family began planning a more sinister attack on Christine's home. Although Christine was unaware of their intentions, she felt that something was wrong. This feeling may have stemmed from the increased activity of David's family around her home. At times, she wondered if she was being paranoid. However, her fears were well-founded. She was indeed being watched and targeted. During this time, Christine confided in several friends and family members about her belief that David's family wanted to harm her. Determined to protect herself, she took action. She created a rope ladder for her daughters and devised an escape plan in case an intruder entered the house. With David's imminent release from prison, she predicted that her family might be attacked. Christine shared her plan with her daughters. If anyone from David's family showed up at their door, she would signal the children to warn them and stop the intruders downstairs, while her daughters would escape to safety using a rope ladder from their second-story window. They had devised a plan and practiced it almost every day during their free time to ensure that they would not make any mistakes in a critical situation. All the girls were thoroughly prepared for the attack. As David's release date approached, Christine's anxiety grew. She personally drove her children everywhere, not allowing them to be home alone. The children were terrified for their family's safety. On April 13, 2012, David, after serving 5 years of probation, was released from prison. He moved in with his family in Ed Couch, Texas. There, he wrote a letter to his sister Amy outlining his next steps. Christine was due in court again for a routine hearing on child custody issues. David refused to support the children financially, leaving Christine in dire financial straits as she struggled to work while constantly caring for them. Christine had spent a lot of money to secure her home and, as a result, had to file for alimony. She was extremely nervous about seeing David again. Her boyfriend, Gerald, had offered to accompany her to court, but she had promised to bring her best friend, Beth, who was always there for her. Christine wanted to avoid provoking her ex-husband David in court again, so she declined Gerald's offer. She did not realize that she could be in danger that day. Tragically, the situation escalated. Around 8 a.m., she arrived at the courthouse, where Beth was waiting for her at the entrance. They walked in together and went through the metal detector. As Christine entered, she was suddenly confronted by a man whose face she did not recognize. Suddenly, he pulled out a gun and shot her in the chest. She died right there in the lobby of the courthouse. The next bullet was aimed at Beth, who was with Christine. She tried to run away, but did not have enough time and ended up being an unintended victim. Meanwhile, a gunfight broke out, causing chaos and injuring 2 police officers. Despite this, the officers were able to stop the attacker, wounding him as he tried to leave the building. When he realized he could not escape, he turned the gun on himself and took his own life. However, it was not David who was shot, but his father, Thomas Matusiewicz. The police investigating the case realized that the situation was not yet resolved. They believed that there was a plan to kidnap the children, putting them in danger. They needed to quickly locate all the girls. The police went to the school that Christine's children attended. When the police arrived, David was already at the school and was later arrested. He denied knowing anything about his father's plan. The police did not believe him because it was clear that he knew about the situation. David and his father went to the courthouse, but David did not enter during the incident. Instead, he waited in the car near the building to pick up his father, Thomas. After the shooting, he quickly went into the school to pick up his daughters. Despite knowing that his father was discovered by the police and ended his own life, David remained cold and emotionless, determined to carry out his plan. David's car contained a large number of weapons, which he must have noticed while driving. In addition, a red notebook was discovered in the car, containing a detailed list. He escaped the attack only because he was in the car. Lenora and Amy were taken from their Maryland hideout and brought to the police station for questioning. David's mother and sister also claimed that they knew nothing about Thomas's plan. FBI agents then searched the David family home, where they discovered thousands of pieces of evidence indicating that the plot against Christine had been in the works for months. It was clear that the David family had not completed their plan even after Christine's death. They intended to take the children out of school and smuggle them out of the country. The only way to stop them was through arrest, but at that time, there was not enough evidence against Lenora's mother and Amy, so they had to be released, although they were placed under surveillance. 2 days after Christine's murder, Amy Gonzalez quickly filed for custody of her children, but her request was denied. On February 21, Lenora Matusiewicz appeared in court to defend her late husband, denying any involvement in the plot or persecution. She explained that Thomas had suffered from a meningioma brain tumor, which had caused his behavior to change dramatically. He often acted aggressively, was prone to anger, and struggled to control himself. Lenora claimed that this was why he reacted so violently toward Christine, believing that he had nothing to lose and was trying to protect his son and granddaughter. However, Lenora could not explain why her husband killed Beth, who had nothing to do with the situation. She maintained that she had no knowledge of Thomas's intentions and that he had acted alone. To support her case, Lenora once again accused Christine Belford of being a bad and immoral mother. Knowing that Christine could no longer defend herself against these accusations, Lenora claimed that David's 3 daughters had been repeatedly abused by their mother, and that the daughters had shared this information with her. On August 18, 2013, Lenora recorded evidence of Christine's involvement in the abuse. According to her notes, Amy uploaded a video of Christine to social media. However, this did not support Lenora's actions. Later, both Lenora and Amy were arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit murder, but they did not comment on the situation and maintained their innocence. Preparations for the trial were delayed due to the large amount of evidence that needed to be reviewed. Finally, on June 11, 2015, the trial began. The prosecution collected more than 600 pieces of evidence related to the David family's conspiracy, including the murder weapon, thousands of bullets, and photographs and videos documenting Christine's whereabouts. Emails between David's family members that were presented to the court showed that they had intermediaries to gather information. The key figures was Cindy and Courtney, both of whom were David's mistresses. David was the main player in the scheme. He convinced Cindy to befriend Christine and monitor her activities. This gave Cindy access to Christine's private social media pages, where she could see all of Christine's photos and videos of her friends. This information was crucial to the family's plans. Courtney, another mistress, watched Christine's home and filmed videos to gather damning evidence. However, she was unable to capture anything incriminating in the videos she took. On one occasion, Christine was filmed gently pulling her daughter's hand during a game. The Davids tried to portray this as child abuse, but their claims were not convincing, and no one believed them. The Davids' defense was that they were trying to protect the children from their manipulative mother, Christine. The prosecutor's office had a key advantage: Christine's children, who could provide crucial testimony to support the prosecution. Christine's eldest daughter from her first marriage testified. She shared her fear that David and his family would stop at nothing to harm her sisters. She had always viewed them as a threat and worried that her mother might face similar dangers. She detailed the persistent fear that David's family had instilled in her family for years. In contrast, David, Lenore, and Amy maintained their own version of events and claimed they had acted to protect the children. The Davids built a convincing story. Then Christine's second daughter testified. She denied all charges against her mother, ultimately clearing Christine's reputation. After the testimony of her second daughter, David's family was at a loss for how to react. Ultimately, David Matusiewicz, Amy Gonzalez, and Lenore Matusiewicz were convicted. They were all sentenced to life in prison without parole. At the time of the sentencing, Lenore was seriously ill and had been diagnosed with a terminal illness. Lenore died in prison at the age of 71. The conviction of the David family was a major victory for Christine's daughters, honoring the memory of their mother as she bravely stood up to a crime family. Christine fought to protect her children, even at the cost of her own life. Now, they are safe. After being placed in foster care, the whereabouts of the two daughters are unknown. Christine's eldest daughter, now an adult, remained in Delaware, where she became a mother and hoped to reunite with her younger sisters. Both of David's lovers, Cindy and Courtney, testified against him at trial. They claimed that David had manipulated them. Because they cooperated with the investigation, they were cleared of all charges. Welcome back to our channel. Today, we will explore a new case, the case of Maria Lehner and Laura Dalton. There are individuals who can be described as true parasites. Living off others for extended periods, they are cunning manipulators who constantly exploit their victims. Even more frighteningly, some do not hesitate to take their behavior to the extreme, committing crimes with unimaginable cruelty. On the evening of March 19, 1999, residents of an apartment complex near the Iowa City campus were alarmed by a strong smell of burning and smoke coming from one of the apartments. Some residents stepped outside and saw a fierce fire raging through the windows of a small apartment. They immediately called the fire department. When firefighters arrived on the scene, the fire had already spread, shattering windows and producing thick columns of black smoke. Despite their best efforts, extinguishing the fire proved difficult. Neighbors stated that the apartment was believed to be unoccupied. As the permanent residents were out of town, firefighters initially focused on fighting the fire from the outside before entering the building. Once inside, the smoke began to clear. A desolation scene unfolded. The entire apartment had been devastated. With furniture and belongings reduced to ashes, they found a body lying near the entrance to the hallway. More shockingly, a second body was found in a back room. Both bodies were burned beyond recognition. The first body, located near the door, was less severely burned and was identified as a young woman who appeared to have died from smoke inhalation while attempting to escape. The second body, lying on a bed in a back bedroom. With most of the flesh completely destroyed, it was impossible to identify the victims at the scene due to the severe burns. For this, an examination in the laboratory of forensic experts would be required. Police were quickly called in to investigate the cause of the fire and the deaths. Initial theories suggested that the victims may have succumbed to toxic fumes or suffered an accident, possibly caused by an unextinguished cigarette, since the apartment was a common rental for students during exam periods. Investigators also considered the possibility that the fire was linked to excessive drinking. However, what they uncovered next completely shifted the direction of the investigation. Among the ashes, firefighters found a few items that were surprisingly intact. Among these items, they discovered documents that could help identify the deceased. A driver's license was found in a purse belonging to one of the victims. Following an investigation, the forensic experts confirmed the identities of the victims in there. A victim was identified as 29-year-old Laura Dalton a few days before the fire. Laura had traveled to Iowa City to visit her cousin. Strangely, Laura neither owned nor rented the burned apartment, suggesting she had ended up there by chance. None of the neighbors recognized her. Laura had grown up in the area and lived with her parents before moving away as an adult. However, she often returned to her hometown to visit family and stayed for several days. Iowa City was her favorite place, where she enjoyed spending time not only with her relatives, but also with her friends. It was a charming town where most residents lived modest lives centered around education and part-time work. The second victim, Maria Lehner, was a 27-year-old woman. She came to this town on business. She lived in a rented apartment that was not the one involved in the fire. Maria, like Laura, had no known relationship or connection with the owners of the burned apartment. The next morning, Laura's cousin and Maria's mother went to the morgue to identify the bodies. However, the autopsy revealed a disturbing detail. Both victims had died before the fire started. Their lungs showed no signs of smoke or hot air inhalation, indicating they were not breathing when the fire consumed the apartment. Although the body was severely damaged, the forensic team quickly determined the cause of death to be blunt force trauma to the head, most likely from a construction tool. While inspecting the burned apartment, forensic experts discovered what appeared to be bloodstains and strands of hair. The police promptly began analyzing these as potential evidence. This evidence later confirmed their suspicions were right. A barbell was found in the apartment and identified as the murder weapon, as it contained traces of blood from both victims. During the apartment search, investigators also found an empty can, despite severe fire damage. Appeared to be a can typically used for storing and transporting fuel. Meanwhile, the owners of the apartment denied ever storing fuel in their home, so they determined it had been used shortly before the fire. Detectives concluded that the attacker had murdered Maria and Laura, poured gasoline from the can on their bodies and nearby furniture, and set the apartment on fire to destroy evidence. The presence of flammable substances made it clear that this was a deliberate and carefully planned double murder. However, proven facts, not assumptions, were needed to solve the case. Forensic experts thoroughly examined the scene. A cigarette butt was discovered near the bodies. Simultaneously, forensic experts were in for a great surprise, as it turned out that traces of incipient decomposition were found on the bodies. This decomposition will take at least a day after death. No evidence suggested that the bodies had been moved to the apartment after the murders. Most likely, Maria and Laura were killed there, and their bodies were burned several days later. Through investigation, the investigators speculate that Laura was killed on the night between Wednesday and Thursday, and her body remained in the apartment. Maria was killed a day later. On the night between Thursday and Friday, this discovery shocked the police, as they had initially believed the arson was carried out immediately after the murders to destroy evidence. The most puzzling aspect was that Maria had been brought to the apartment where Laura's body had already been decomposing for a day. Laura's friends reported that the last time they saw her alive was on Wednesday evening. That night, the group of friends decided to spend the evening at a bar, and Laura joined them for a few hours. Everyone was having fun, drinking, and relaxing. They tried not to overindulge. During the evening, Laura met a young man who had been sitting at a nearby table for most of the night. As the group became more intoxicated, Laura and the man started talking. Witnesses later admitted they didn't pay much attention to him. The two quickly struck up a conversation, and after some time, the man suggested they go to another bar. Laura initially declined but eventually agreed. After some persuasion, witnesses stated that this was the last time anyone saw Laura alive. She left with the man shortly before midnight, according to the autopsy report. She was killed not long after. The thing to do now is to find this strange man. Unfortunately, no one knew his name and could not really describe his appearance. The police needed at least some details to begin the investigation. Witnesses were thoroughly questioned to create a rough profile of the unknown man. He was described as tall, around 20 years old or slightly older. With brown hair, witnesses also noted his disheveled appearance. Laura's friends were unaware of what had happened to her. She didn't call them the next day, and she hadn't contacted anyone at all. Laura also failed to attend the group's next party, held at the same bar the following evening. This time, Laura's friend, Maria, was present at the party. Maria's body was also later found in the burned apartment, and it appears she was killed just one day after Laura. Strangely, witnesses reported an almost identical story about Laura. Maria had been drinking with friends, and she caught the attention of a similarly unkempt young man sitting at a nearby table. He appeared friendly and spent much of the evening trying to charm her. The man seemed skilled at gaining trust, easily convincing Maria to leave with him for another party. She failed to recognize the threat and trusted the persuasive stranger. The bar owner also noticed them as they left. He provided the investigative agency with a slightly more detailed description of the man the investigator were searching for. This helped detectives create a more accurate sketch despite the limited information, but the investigation now had a lead. The police also identified his behavior pattern. He observed women in bars for extended periods, waiting until they were intoxicated enough to lower their guard before making his move. In addition, he had access to one of the rented apartments. Either using his own key or the trust of the landlords, the police interviewed everyone, including students, who might have had access to the burned apartment. However, most of them had moved out long ago and no longer had access. For a time, the investigation stalled. In addition to the help of forensic experts and laboratory tests, additional evidence is needed to advance the case. One of the key stages of the work was to conduct an analysis of the discovered empty can. The resulting picture was consistent with what is left by gasoline vapors. The empty can was clearly used to carry fuel, which was poured over the bodies. Among the other evidence found at the scene of the double murder was a matchbox with just one match missing. It appeared the perpetrator assumed the fire would destroy all evidence. However, the fire was extinguished before everything was consumed. Investigators concluded the match had been used to ignite the fire. Unfortunately, no fingerprints or DNA were found on the matchbox, leaving it unusable for identifying the suspect. After unsuccessful attempts at investigation, the investigators returned to the scene to look for more clues. By that point, the apartment had been cleaned and organized, making it impossible to find any new evidence. Initially, they had photographs taken at the scene of the fire. In one of the photos, they noticed a pair of suspicious glasses. These glasses matched descriptions provided by witnesses who had seen strangers at the bar days before the fire. Although the glasses survived the fire, they were not listed among the collected evidence. Fortunately, the apartment owner had not discarded them and handed them over to the police. When detectives examined the glasses, they discovered they also did not belong to the former tenants. The most valuable evidence ended up in the hands of the investigators, which later allowed them to obtain a huge amount of valuable information about the criminal to prove his connection with the murders. That these were not ordinary glasses but ones with special lenses that correct vision. They were checked to determine what vision deviation the criminal had. This helped the detectives narrow down their suspect and determine whether these were his glasses. After that, the police officers had enough evidence and testimony to approximately reconstruct the picture of what happened. They reviewed the chain of events that led to this tragic outcome several times. In the end, the most probable version was recognized as the following. Presumably, both girls died one day before the fire started. The cause of death for each was prolonged beating with a blunt object, likely a barbell. They received head injuries incompatible with life to get rid of traces of the crime. The attacker decided to set fire to the apartment along with the bodies. The attacker appeared to stage the scene to resemble a real-life event. He placed the second victim in the hallway, while the first victim was beaten to death in bed. Afterward, he brought a gas can of gasoline into the apartment and carefully poured it over the furniture, floor, walls, and the victims' bodies. However, his critical mistake was smoking during the process. At the crime scene, forensic experts discovered a cigarette that had been extinguished and was not destroyed by the fire. Initially, no traces of the killer were found on the cigarette. Based on the circumstances, it seems the attacker was bent over, smoking, and pouring gasoline. When the concentration of vapors increased, the cigarette ignited. The resulting flames struck the attacker in the face, causing him to drop his glasses. The glasses were found slightly melted. It being in a less damaged part of the apartment, it is likely that the cigarette ignited the gasoline, triggering a chain reaction. This forced the killer to abandon the gas can, glasses, and cigarette at the crime scene, and assuming they would be destroyed in the fire. However, these items became key evidence. After interviewing the owner of the burned apartment, it was revealed that several valuable items, including 2 expensive household appliances, were missing. The investigators suspected the attacker would try to sell the stolen items, so they focused on local pawn shops. As these are the quickest and easiest places to sell stolen goods, their efforts paid off when they identified a suspect. After speaking with the owner of the pawn shop closest to the burned apartment, the detectives obtained receipts for items matching the stolen goods. Selling property at a pawn shop requires presenting an ID and filling out paperwork, which meant the attacker couldn't avoid giving his real name. This is how the investigators came across John Lee Meur. John was a 20-year-old unemployed man who was well known in the city since he was a regular at various parties. He knew where to get a free drink. He was a good conversationalist and was described as a quiet guy. John attended various events after moving to the city. He had been jobless for a long time and didn't have a permanent home. He relied on friends, particularly students, who let him stay in their rented apartments, allowing him to get by. It is important to note that his appearance matches the description of the suspect and also often wears glasses. When the police looked into John's background, they discovered he had previously been conditionally released early for theft and document forgery. Now, John, the main suspect, could face a real prison sentence due to repeated offenses. An investigation also began into his possible involvement in the double murder. Immediately after that, John was arrested, and during interrogation, the police noticed slight burns on his face, including a small burn on his nose. This detail reinforced the detective's suspicion of his involvement in the fire. John appeared nervous and often hesitated before answering their questions. When he realized he was a suspect in the arson and murders, he began changing his story, leading to numerous contradictions. He claimed that, on that night, he broke in and stole several household appliances, which he later pawned. However, he denied any involvement in the arson or the murders of Maria and Laura. Refused to accept those charges. John explained that he had been using the apartment with another homeless man. Because knowing the owners would be out of town for an extended period, he described the second homeless man as suspicious and potentially dangerous. But the investigation could not confirm that this person existed. It seemed likely that John had fabricated the story to shift the blame. The investigators was determined that just a few days after the discovery of the two bodies, John visited an optical store and ordered new glasses using an old prescription. The glasses found in the burnt apartment completely corresponded to the prescription for correcting John's vision. This didn't seem like a mere coincidence. John was unable to explain why his glasses were found in the burned apartment, claiming he had lost them a long time ago. Following this, forensic experts decided to analyze the cigarette butt found at the arson site, suspecting it might contain DNA evidence from the perpetrator. By this point, John had already provided the investigators with samples for analysis. The results revealed traces of saliva and skin on the cigarette butt, which were examined and matched to John's DNA. This breakthrough was achieved using advanced forensic methods introduced in the late 1990s, which had become widely used by police at the time. These things strongly linked John to the crime scene. Though not directly to the victims, John later changed his story, admitting that he had been in the apartment and had snuck in with another homeless person when the apartment renter was not home. He offered a plausible explanation for why his glasses and cigarettes were found there. The police also focused on other pieces of evidence, particularly a leather jacket belonging of Laura, which was found in the ashes. Investigators began searching for traces of DNA. Initially, the jacket was examined under ultraviolet light, but no traces were found. Then, a different method was used to search for fingerprints. The fingerprint on Laura's jacket was identified as John's, however. This alone did not confirm his involvement in the murder. Detectives also examined John's shoes and the clothes he wore on the days of the murders. On one of his shoes, they found two tiny droplets of blood, about the size of a match head. Forensic scientists analyzed the samples and determined that the blood belonged to Maria. It was clear that John had attempted to wash his clothes, but traces of blood remained. Now, the police obtained undeniable proof of his guilt. John was unable to explain how the victim's blood ended up on his shoes. This detail became clear evidence that he had been in contact with Maria around the time of her death. When confronted with the accusations and presented with the evidence, John changed his story yet again. This time, he claimed that he had invited Maria and Laura over. They had been intimate. Then he left first, however, due to the condition of the bodies. This claim couldn't be verified. Forensic experts found no indication of an intimate relationship prior to Maria and Laura deaths. His story was clearly false, and his shifting testimonies only deepened the investigators' mistrust. With all the evidence collected, the prosecutor's office pieced together the chain of events leading to the fire and the double murder. John had gained access to the apartment while the tenants were out of town. There were no signs of forced entry. This easy access to the home alarmed the tenant's owner and moved elsewhere. After meeting Maria and Laura at a nightclub, John waited until they were intoxicated and less alert. He then initiated friendly conversation, flirted, and used his charm to gain their trust. Eventually, he convinced them to go to this apartment. His intention was to pursue intimacy, but neither Laura nor Maria reciprocated his advances. This rejection infuriated him and caused him to lose control. In his anger, he attacked Maria and Laura with a barbell. The severe head injuries they sustained from the blows resulted in their deaths the following day. On Friday, John returned to the scene to destroy evidence and steal household appliances from the apartment to cover his tracks. He set a fire, but made several mistakes, leaving behind significant evidence at the crime scene. A few days later, John was tried on charges of first-degree murder and arson. The defense has stressed that John is not known for being aggressive, although he has a history of minor crimes. He has never physically harmed anyone. Besides, one key point the prosecution has highlighted is the tattoo of two teardrops near his eyes, a symbol commonly used in the criminal world to indicate murder. He got these tattoos before attending the trial. However, John claims that the tattoo were merely a tribute to two friends who died in a car accident. The prosecution presented a combination of circumstantial and direct evidence to build its case. As John has never confessed to his guilt, the overwhelming evidence convinced the jury that John was the perpetrator. As a result, John Lee Meur was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of arson. He's sentenced to 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. After serving 10 years, John appealed. Claiming that the public defenders had failed to do their job effectively, he argued that the prosecution relied heavily on circumstantial evidence, and that his defense team had failed to adequately challenge it. The appeal was considered by the court. However, after a retrial, he was found guilty, and the sentence was upheld. Hello again, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Michael Weiss. Jake Nolan was born in New York, USA, as the youngest child in his family, with an older brother and an older sister. The family lived on Long Island and was relatively wealthy. Jake was known for being kind and respectful to everyone. However, at the age of 5, he was diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. This condition affected him throughout his life, becoming more evident at the age of 15 when he began to experience mood swings. Despite facing many challenges, Jake had some positive moments in high school, including being recognized for winning a competition. However, this was also when he was diagnosed with anxiety and depression at the age of 17. Jake was hospitalized after a disturbing incident involving his parents after an argument. He threatened to commit end life with a kitchen knife. During this time, he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, a serious condition. His parents tried to help him manage his health problems and regularly consulted specialists, but their efforts were not very successful. Jake was prescribed about 30 different medications. This alone led to serious side effects, often leaving him feeling worse than before. Many of the medications interacted negatively with each other, resulting in poor treatment outcomes during this time. Jake also began drinking and using drugs. When Jake started college, his parents hoped he would improve. At first, everything seemed fine, but then they received a worried call from the school. The dean wanted to know why Jake had been absent for the past 2 weeks. That's when his parents discovered that he had been in bed most of the time. His depression worsened, and he began using illegal drugs regularly. This alarmed his family, who wanted to help him. But even at 19, Jake showed no interest in studying or working. Instead, he spent all his time having fun and avoiding responsibility. One day, Jake's mother spoke to her niece, Pamela Buckbinder, a successful psychiatrist in New York by her 40s. Pamela had won numerous awards and occasionally published articles in popular magazines. Concerned about Jake, Pamela offered to take him into her home for a while and set up a makeshift rehab facility there. She promised to organize therapy sessions for Jake and monitor his medication instead of charging him for her help. Pamela asked Jake to assist her in caring for her 4-year-old son during the summer due to their family ties. They agreed to her plan. Pamela and Jake are cousins, and she saw this as an opportunity to strengthen their family bond while helping to care for her son. When Jake's mother shared this with him, he viewed it as a break from his family and agreed to stay with Pamela for a few months, during which he would help care for her son. Pamela's husband is another prominent psychiatrist, Michael Weiss. Pamela and Michael had a rocky relationship. They often argued and got into physical fights. In one incident, Pamela was arrested for throwing a glass at Michael, causing a head injury that required stitches. Pamela argued that they were both equally at fault, as Michael was also arrested after another altercation and was accused of threatening her. Pamela and Michael ended their relationship in 2009, after which Pamela moved to Greenwich Village in Manhattan in 2011. They began a custody battle during this time. Pamela often spoke ill of Michael to their son, portraying him as a bad father. She also spread false and damaging stories about him to others, apparently trying to turn the child and others against him. This behavior was primarily intended to gain an advantage in the custody dispute and secure a substantial child support payment. By 2012, the couple finally reached an agreement that allowed Michael to spend weekends with their children. However, an unusual condition imposed by Pamela was that Michael purchase a life insurance policy on himself, naming their son Calder as the beneficiary, with Pamela as the trustee. Eventually, Michael, exhausted from the legal battle, reluctantly agreed to this questionable request. The custody battle reached its final stages after Jake moved into Pamela's home. Jake began sharing his thoughts and struggles with Pamela, who gave him advice, monitored his medications, and made his life much easier. Jake became the godfather to Pamela's son Calder, and often said that the experience gave his life meaning. On November 12, 2012, Michael spent the day with his son, Calder, for the first time. He felt excited because he had reached an agreement with Pamela about custody, allowing him to interact with Calder without stress. Michael's schedule that morning was to take Calder to kindergarten and then go to work. In the afternoon, Calder would return home to his mother, while Michael was attending a therapy session with a patient. Jake appeared at the door with a worried look on his face and carrying a large bag. Michael realized that Jake knew he had moved in with Pamela and was dealing with some mental health issues. However, Michael was unsure about the current situation because he was with a patient. He asked Jake to wait outside until he finished. When the therapy session ended, Michael found Jake still waiting in the hallway. Dr. Michael asked him about the large bag. Jake claimed that it contained important documents for Calder's kindergarten that he had helped Pamela prepare. However, Michael was skeptical about this explanation. Michael asked Jake to leave the bag outside because he was worried that Jake might plant a listening device there. However, Jake insisted he couldn't leave the bag behind as it could be stolen. Eventually, Michael relented and allowed Jake to bring the bag inside with him upon entering the office. Jake asked to use the restroom first. Later, he attacked Michael with a sledgehammer. Fortunately, Michael avoided a fatal blow to the head, but Jake struck him in the shoulder. Jake then lost his balance because the sledgehammer was too heavy, dropped it, and pulled out a knife to attack Michael. Michael fought back, pushed Jake away, tried to run into the hallway, and called for help. People gathered in the hallway, and shortly after, Michael passed out from blood loss. Witnesses called the police and paramedics. Jake, however, didn't attempt to flee. Instead, he sat in the hallway and took pictures. When the paramedics arrived, they found Michael unconscious and Jake sitting beside him. Jake told the paramedics that Michael had attacked him first. Meanwhile, both Michael and Jake were taken to the hospital, where they were placed under police supervision. Forensic experts retrieved the sledgehammer and knife from Michael's office. Upon examination, they found a DNA sample on the handle of the sledgehammer that matched Jake's. The knife was also analyzed and determined to have come from Pamela's kitchen inside a large bag belonging to Jake. The police found a pack of cigarettes, zip ties, and a hand-drawn map of the building where Michael worked, showing multiple entrances and exits. The police traced the bag to a purchase near Pamela's home. They reviewed surveillance footage from a nearby hardware store and observed that Jake had bought the sledgehammer used in the attack, along with zip ties and a bag. The night before, Pamela was seen next to him, paying cash for the items, possibly aware of the planned crime. Although Michael suffered multiple injuries, none were life-threatening. Jake was taken to the hospital but was released on $200 bail while awaiting a hearing on the attempted murder charge. He is allowed to stay with his parents in Miami. Jake spoke to the police and claimed that the attack was self-defense, stating that Michael had taken Jake's sledgehammer and tried to injure himself. When Jake realized that his lie was not convincing, he decided to tell the police the truth about what had happened. He accused Pamela of being the real mastermind. Claiming that she had manipulated him and turned him against Michael, Pamela then provided the police with Jake's medical history, which indicated that he had suffered from a number of serious mental health issues. The police investigated Jake's testimony, and evidence supporting his claim quickly emerged. Pamela had an ulterior motive to harm her ex-husband. In November 2013, Michael Weiss filed a lawsuit against Pamela, alleging that his ex-wife pressured him into taking out a $1 million life insurance policy. He pointed out that the attack occurred just 4 days after the contract was issued, which raised suspicions. Michael believed that this was a planned plot to benefit Pamela financially. Additionally, Jake's attorney secured a restraining order against Pamela, arguing that it was necessary to protect Jake's mental health from her influence. Despite the overwhelming evidence against Pamela, she was not arrested or questioned, and her medical license remained intact. Meanwhile, the investigation continued, and an expert was brought in to analyze the building blueprints found in Jake's bag. It was revealed that Pamela had drawn the blueprints, but she claimed that the maps were for Jake to find Michael and pick up Calder if necessary. Pamela was in regular contact with Jake before and after the attempted assassination. Their text messages showed that she was aware of his whereabouts and what was going on. After Jake sent a selfie to Michael following the attempted assassination, they had a long conversation that revealed the plan had failed. Jake expressed guilt for not being able to kill Michael during this time. Jake fully admitted his actions and showed a willingness to accept the consequences, no matter how severe they might be. He told detectives that Pamela had convinced him to kill Michael to free her from an abusive relationship that was harming both her and her young son at the time. Jake was so close to the boy that he wanted to help his relatives get rid of Michael. He did not know that Michael's life was insured for a significant amount of money and that Pamela could benefit from the insurance payout. Jake did not care about the money because his family supported him. However, Pamela manipulated him to the point that he was willing to do anything for her. Unfortunately, the case did not progress. Even after 2 years, the situation remained unchanged. As of 2015, Pamela was still living comfortably at home with her son, sharing custody with Michael, as there was no evidence to prove her involvement in the attempted murder. Meanwhile, Jake is in Miami, receiving comprehensive care, and his condition begins to improve as he starts to regain his sanity. Jake realizes that he has become a pawn in Pamela's scheme. Devoted to caring for her child and managing household responsibilities, he understands that Pamela never intended to help him. Instead, she aimed to use him for her own dubious purposes. Jake has overcome his harmful habits and envisions a future where he can start a family and raise children. However, he faces the serious possibility of being imprisoned for years due to the betrayal of someone he once trusted. Additionally, questions begin to arise regarding the nature of Jake's relationship with Pamela, which seems to extend beyond simple family support and therapeutic assistance. Their interactions resemble typical affectionate exchanges between newlyweds, and a photo of them together in bed has surfaced. It appears that Pamela is pursuing Jake with the intent of deepening their relationship. Possibly to manipulate him, Pamela recounted a fabricated story of having endured physical violence throughout her marriage. She eventually accused Michael of trying to gain custody of their son. Over time, Jake grew to believe her, insisting that he would do anything for Pamela. She convinced him that in order to survive, he needed to eliminate Michael. It was clear that Pamela was not strong enough to confront a robust adult man, making Jake a suitable candidate for her dangerous scheme. The trial began in March 2016, where the jury was presented with a detailed account of the events that took place on November 12, 2012. Jake recalled Pamela waking him up that morning, insisting that it was time to put their plan into action, she showered him with compliments, calling him her savior after breakfast. She continued her manipulations. On November 11, they purchased a sledgehammer, zip ties, and a bag in preparation for their plan. The details of the plot were far more sinister than the events that transpired in Michael's office initially. Jake was supposed to attack Michael and torture him before he died. Pamela wanted Michael to suffer for as long as possible. Jake then went to Michael's office, entering through the service entrance, where security cameras recorded his arrival. Remarkably, he made no attempt to conceal his identity. With confidence, he walked down the hallway and approached Michael's office. At the time, Michael was examining a patient, forcing Jake to step back and wait outside. Jake was in the hallway. Rethinking his actions, he soon realized that if he backed out now, he wouldn't be able to face Pamela. There was no turning back. So he carried out the attack while awaiting trial. Jake undergoes evaluations from several psychiatrists, who noted that he was fully aware of his actions. Concluding that his decision to kill Michael was intentional, the jury deliberated and found Jake Nolan guilty of attempted murder. He was sentenced to 9.5 years in prison, while Pamela remained free on bail. This changed on October 19, 2017, when the police attempted to arrest Pamela and urged her to turn herself in, but she ignored their requests. When the search began, she could not be found at any known address and did not answer her cell phone or work phone. An anonymous source eventually informed the police of Pamela's whereabouts, and she was arrested at a friend's home. Pamela was charged with second-degree intentional homicide and first-degree assault. On September 7, 2022, Pamela Buchbinder admitted guilty to these charges to avoid a 25-year sentence. However, on October 11 of that year, she attempted to withdraw her guilty plea, claiming that she had been under the influence of illegal drugs and had been assaulted by security guards. Her request to withdraw her guilty plea was denied. Ultimately, Pamela was sentenced to 11 years in prison, and her medical license was officially revoked. Jake felt deep remorse for his actions. His parents firmly believed in his innocence and were convinced that Pamela was responsible for his condition. Jake's parents stated that sending Jake to Pamela's home for treatment was the worst decision they ever made. Pamela, however, continued to maintain her innocence. The child's father, Michael, was granted custody. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case, the case of Saga Elniborg. Saga Elniborg was a 20-year-old girl who was 7 months pregnant at the time. She was in a relationship with her boyfriend, Mohammedaman Dirisek Ibrahim, the father of her child. They had been together for about 2 years and were expecting a baby boy. With doctors confirming that the pregnancy was progressing well, Saga was eagerly looking forward to becoming a mother in just a few weeks and had carefully prepared for the birth of her child. During this time, she shared pictures of her growing belly and many items she had bought for her future child on social media. She was especially fond of posting pictures of children's clothes. On April 28, 2023, Saga had scheduled a meeting with her boyfriend, Mohammed Amin, to discuss their relationship. That day, she informed her mother that Mohammed Amin was planning to visit her home, so Melissa decided not to interrupt their conversation. Saga's family was very cautious about her relationship with someone from a different culture, especially since they knew that challenges could arise when meeting Mohammed Amin's family from Somalia. At that time, Mohammed Amin was standing outside Saga's apartment door when he entered the house. Saga began to share some of the problems they were having in their relationship. Saga still loved Mohammed Amin and wanted their relationship to succeed. However, she felt uncomfortable when he often hid her from his parents, which caused conflicts between them. On April 29, 2023, at around 1 p.m., Saga's mother, Melissa, came to her daughter's apartment to support her and help gather her belongings in preparation for the arrival of her grandson. When Melissa arrived at the apartment, she was talking on the phone with her other daughter. She rang the doorbell several times, but no one answered, which surprised her. She knocked on the door, used the intercom, and even called Saga's phone and sent a text message. What puzzled she was that there was still no response from Saga. She thought that her daughter might have forgotten about her visit and gone out to run an errand. Although Melissa had a spare key, she noticed that the door was unlocked as she approached, which seemed very suspicious. Saga was always careful to lock the door. Even when she stepped out for a moment to get the mail or do the laundry, there was no way she would leave the door open. When she entered the apartment, Melissa heard the sound of running water in the kitchen, so she rushed in to turn it off. She called out to her daughter, but there was no answer. When Melissa entered her daughter's bedroom, she found the lights off, and the darkness made her feel uneasy. When Melissa turned on the light, she was horrified to see her daughter lying on the floor. Saga was there, with a light cord wrapped around her neck. The scene was even more terrifying because a heavy table had fallen over. Melissa rushed to her daughter's side, pushed the table aside, and carefully removed the cord from her neck. She then called emergency services while attempting to give her daughter first aid. The first thing she noticed was that Saga's body was stiff and very cold, indicating that she had been dead for a considerable amount of time. Paramedics arrived quickly, but unfortunately, both Saga and her unborn child were dead. The police who arrived began an investigation and noted that she had suffered head and facial injuries. The crime scene was covered in dried blood, and jewelry boxes were found upside down on the floor. There were no signs of forced entry, but the police initially considered that she had taken her own life. However, after reviewing data from Saga's cell phone, they concluded that she could not have ended her life by herself. Saga had no mental health problems. She was cheerful and lively. Especially during her pregnancy, she was eagerly awaiting the birth of her child and could never have harmed herself or her baby. Forensic experts collected a significant amount of evidence at the crime scene, including fingerprints, blood, and DNA from under Saga's fingernails and from her belongings for analysis. The forensic expert concluded that Saga died of strangulation, with an estimated time of death between 1 and 3 in the morning. On the forensic expert's desk were not only Saga's body, but also the body of her newborn baby. Weighing 1.7 kg, tests showed that the baby was completely healthy. This was a devastating shock to Saga's mother, family, and friends. The police quickly launched an investigation into the messages from Saga's relatives. The first person they spoke to was her mother, Melissa. She explained that on April 28, her daughter had planned to meet some friends at a local restaurant. Melissa noticed that her daughter seemed very anxious and was checking her phone frequently. Saga said that she did not want to miss a message from her boyfriend, Mohammed Amin. Melissa revealed that he had already informed his parents about Saga. However, before that, Mohammed Amin had been extremely anxious and nearly had a nervous breakdown because he feared that his parents would not approve of his relationship with Saga. His parents are Muslims with strict conservative beliefs. In contrast, Saga is a Swedish citizen with Thai and European heritage, and she holds more modern views. Mohammed Amin and his family are refugees. His parents brought him to Europe when he was a child. Although he grew up in Europe and embraced modernity, he still valued his family's traditions. Another important issue was the difference in religion. Mohammed Amin's family was Muslim, while Saga's relatives were Christian. This difference in beliefs and traditions often led to conflict, straining their relationship. After dining at the restaurant, Saga said goodbye to her mother and friends, who wished her well, not knowing that it would be the last time they would see her alive. Tragically, after returning home, Saga was murdered. Police suspect that Mohammed Amin may have informed his family about his relationship with Saga. which may have provoked their violent reaction and ultimately led to the tragedy. During the initial stages of the investigation, the police looked into whether Muhammad Amin's relatives were involved in the murder. His mother had raised suspicions when she left home late at night. However, it was later confirmed that she had only gone to the shop and returned after about 15 minutes. There was no evidence that his relatives were involved in the case. The police also discovered that one day, Muhammad Amin's mother found the car he was using parked near Saga's house. At that time, his mother suspected he was having a romantic relationship with a Christian woman. After discovering this, Muhammad Amin's mother was furious. She informed him that he was no longer welcome in their home. She felt that if he did not respect their traditions, it would be easier to cut ties with him. In his defense, Muhammad Amin claimed that he had never visited those people and that he had convinced her of that. However, according to Melissa, their relationship had deteriorated since Saga became pregnant. It was rumored that Muhammad Amin wanted her to have an abortion because he was afraid of his family's reaction. Despite this pressure, Saga decided to continue with the pregnancy and give birth. She said that if necessary, she could raise the child herself. In October, Saga shared the news of her pregnancy with her family, and everyone was very happy at that time. Her relationship with her boyfriend was not good, as they often had conflicts due to cultural differences, which made communication difficult. Saga felt that if Muhammad Amin did not change his views, it would be difficult for them to connect. However, a few months later, things seemed to improve. He began to adapt to her lifestyle and accepted the pregnancy. Appearing happy to be a father, Saga then moved into a larger apartment with a nursery, which she began to decorate. By March 2023, they were still together, but there were some troubling signs in their relationship. A friend confided in Saga that Muhammad Amin had tried to convince her that she needed to kick Saga in the stomach multiple times to induce a miscarriage. Saga was furious when she learned about this, but Muhammad Amin insisted that it was all a fabrication. Melissa knew about these disturbing events, but did not want to accept them as true. However, now that her daughter was dead, it was clear that Muhammad Amin's intention to harm Saga was real. The police began to piece together a timeline of events and soon discovered that Muhammad Amin and Saga had planned to spend that evening together. However, he seemed to be avoiding Saga, intentionally staying late at work to avoid seeing her that evening. Saga spoke to him. She told Muhammad Amin that he needed to tell his family about their relationship, the move, and her pregnancy, or they would break up. On April 28, Saga was waiting to hear from him, according to Melissa. Her daughter seemed quite anxious during this time. The police reviewed cell phone records and confirmed that Saga had been in contact with Muhammad Amin until 11 p.m. on April 28. He had said that he would not inform his parents about Saga and their relationship, stating that his family was more important than having an illegitimate child. Saga felt disappointed with his decision and tried to convince him to reconsider. She argued that if they broke up, his family would eventually find out about the child because she had planned to seek financial support from him after discussing their situation. Muhammad Amin agreed to tell his family about Saga and the baby. He expressed his anxiety, saying that he felt like his heart was going to burst. This was the last message he sent her before she was killed. Police believe that Saga's determination to reveal the truth and her ability to tell his parents herself motivated Muhammad Amin to attack the girl. He remains the only suspect in the case. Muhammad Amin was brought in for questioning. He claimed he had nothing to do with the incident and stated that on the night of the murder, he had returned home to confess to his parents about his relationship with Saga. However, geolocation data showed that this was not true. Muhammad Amin had, in fact, gone to his girlfriend's apartment when told that he was the prime suspect in Saga's murder. Muhammad Amin became defensive. He insisted he was innocent and had an alibi. claiming that he was driving with a friend at the time of Saga's murder. However, the friend was on the phone with someone else and refused to testify, despite his alibi failing. Mohammed Amin maintained that he last saw Saga on the evening of April 27. Mohammed Amin stated that he had confessed their relationship to his parents. However, the police discovered that he had never spent a full night at her new apartment, as he was afraid his family would find out. Due to Mohammed Amin's suspicious behavior, the police decided to arrest him and keep him in custody while they continued their investigation. He was detained for several months. Eventually, the prosecution gathered strong evidence against him, claiming it was sufficient to ensure victory in court. The investigation even involved specially trained dogs, which helped identify some of the evidence. Mohammed Amin's lawyer argued that the dogs' findings should not be the main basis of the case, as they were not a reliable source of information. However, there was still much more evidence against him. DNA analysis and a review of the evidence took quite a while, but eventually confirmed the truth of the case. Mohammed Amin wrapped an electric cord around Saga's neck while she was sleeping on the sofa. He then dragged Saga to the floor and attempted to push her onto her stomach in an effort to force her to terminate the pregnancy. Despite her best efforts to protect her child, Saga sustained injuries to her hip. Mohammed Amin then attempted to strangle Saga, pressing the edge of the table against her throat. Exhausted and unable to lift the heavy object, Saga suffocated. When she died, the table was still pressed against her throat, leaving a deep dent after committing the crime. Mohammed Amin tried to make it look like a robbery by throwing some boxes around. The defense argued that Saga was the victim of real robbers who stole money and various household items. However, the prosecutor believed that Mohammed Amin's actions only added to his guilt. Several missing items were later discovered during a search of his home. He claimed that these items were either his or gifts from his girlfriend. A key piece of evidence against him was his DNA found under Saga's fingernails. In addition, a forensic expert determined that Saga had been abused before her death. Mohammed Amin claimed that the act was consensual and had occurred a few days before her death. However, the prosecution cast doubt on his testimony, highlighting inconsistencies and lies in his statements during interrogation. Police found multiple traces of his DNA in Saga's apartment. The investigation revealed some disturbing searches by Mohammed Amin. Notably, he searched whether kicking a mother in the stomach could harm her unborn child. The prosecutor's office believes that instead of visiting his family, Mohammed Amin went to Saga's apartment. He never intended to tell his family about her for fear of their reaction, but Saga pressured him with her demands. In response, he killed her. Motivated by fear of his parents, the defense argued that the DNA found under Saga's fingernails could have been there long before the murder. However, Melissa, Saga's mother, insisted that her daughter was very clean and had showered shortly before her death. She knew this, especially during Saga's pregnancy. As her daughter was meticulous about her personal hygiene, it is clear that Saga had showered and changed into clean clothes, meaning that the DNA evidence found on her body and belongings was still fresh and must have been left behind during the attack. Curiously, after Saga's death, Mohammed Amin quickly deleted her from Snapchat and removed his social media accounts. The police found that he was trying to hide his connection to the crime. Fortunately, the deleted data was easily recovered and added to the evidence against him. Although there was no direct evidence, Mohammed Amin's behavior clearly showed that he was indifferent to his girlfriend, Saga. During the investigation, it was noted that he was a short distance from her apartment while continuing to communicate with her from afar. He neither approached nor left, as if he were waiting for something. It is possible that during this time, he was trying to muster the courage to attack or wanted to ensure that Saga was asleep. At 2 a.m., Mohammed Amin's cell phone signal went off. He then turned on his phone to try to contact his friend, but his call was ignored. An active call signal from him was detected in the same residential area where Saga lived. This evidence helped the police uncover another lie by Mohammed Amin. He claimed that during this time, he was at home with his parents. However, Mohammed Amin's cell phone only became active at 2:16 a.m., which matched the forensic expert's conclusion about the time of death of Saga and her child. Mohammed Amin's story kept changing. At one point, he fabricated a story about a gang of robbers. He claimed to have hidden a bag of money in Saga's home, but he never explained where he obtained the large sum. According to Mohammed Amin, the robbers broke into Saga's home to steal the cash. Saga tried to stop the robbers, which ultimately led to her murder. The prosecutor's office rejected this idea. As there were no signs of forced entry at the crime scene, it was clear that Saga had either let the killer into her home willingly or that he had a key to her apartment. Mohammed Amin had a motive for the crime. During his 9 months in prison, he never confessed and steadfastly denied any involvement. However, the prosecutor's office gathered a significant amount of evidence, both direct and indirect, to support their case. Although he did not admit to the crime, he expressed fear about telling his family about Saga. He claimed to love her and even the child, but he believed his conservative parents would disown him for dating a European girl. After hearing arguments from both the prosecution and the defense, the jury deliberated on the verdict. On June 9, 2024, they unanimously found Mohammed Amin Abdirisek Ibrahim guilty of the premeditated murder of Saga Elniborg, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Despite this, he maintained that he loved both Saga and his unborn child. Claiming that he never intended to harm them, he insisted that violence was not part of his character and that this was the first crime he had ever committed. The investigation revealed that Mohammed Amin had been seeing other women regularly during the 2 years of his relationship with Saga. Although he denied any extramarital affairs, evidence showed that he had numerous meetings with different girls, some of which became intimate. This information further tarnished his reputation. His defense attorney, meanwhile, argued that Mohammed Amin was innocent and that Saga had been the victim of an attempted robbery. The attorney promised to fight for his freedom and intended to appeal the jury's decision. An appeal was filed shortly after the decision was announced, but the final outcome remains unclear. Although Mohammed Amin was charged with Saga's murder, he was never charged in connection with the death of his unborn child, which angered Saga's family. The investigation attracted considerable public and media attention. The tragedy once again highlighted issues surrounding migrants, especially those from Muslim countries, who have been arriving in Sweden more frequently in recent years. Many people have noted that these migrants struggle to integrate into European society and often refuse to accept individuals from different cultures. A violent murder arising from cultural and religious differences sparked public outrage and prompted calls for government action. Some defended Mohammed Amin, claiming he was innocent. His family argued that he had no violent tendencies, and many believed in his innocence, offering him strong support. According to relatives, Mohammed Amin was not ready to be a father, but he maintained that he loved his girlfriend and son, even after their tragic deaths. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case, the case of William Bradford Bishop. On March 1, 1976, William Bradford Bishop Jr., a prominent employee of the United States Foreign Service, brutally murdered his wife, Annette Catherine Weiss, his mother, Lobelia Amaryllis St. Germain, and his 3 sons are 14 years old, 10 years old, and 5 years old. This shocking crime came without warning, as there seemed to be no motive, and William, who had no history of violence, disappeared after the murders. What could have driven this respected professional to commit such a horrific act? In this discussion, we will outline a timeline of William's life and reconstruct the events of that tragic night. In order to answer this question, William was born on August 1, 1936, to Lobelia Amaryllis, Saint Germain, and William Bradford Bishop Sr., growing up in a wealthy family in Pasadena, California. William had a privileged childhood filled with opportunities, however. This wealth also created pressure for him to prove himself. Families with generational wealth often expect their descendants to increase the family fortune, and William became fixated on maintaining that expectation throughout his life. William had every opportunity to acquire the skills needed to succeed in high society. He was a naturally intelligent and talented boy, with a remarkable ability to learn languages and a genuine interest in exploring different cultures, which positioned him well for a career in the Foreign Service by the time he graduated from South Pasadena High School. Everyone anticipated great achievements from him. He was not only an outstanding student, but also athletic and charismatic, qualities that made him appear to be a natural leader. His impressive height of over 6 feet further enhanced his appeal, however. Beneath his seemingly perfect exterior lay a deep obsession that only a few close to him could recognize. William was an extreme perfectionist. This same drive that propelled him forward in the Foreign Service also made him quick to anger, which likely contributed to his violent outburst on the night of the incident. There was no sign of the uncontrollably violent William, at least. No one who knew him casually would say that he was violent. He graduated from Yale in 1959. The only person who may have glimpsed his true nature was his wife, Annette Catherine Weiss, whom he married a few months after college. Little is known about Annette's early life, but we do know she met William in high school when she was a freshman. It's likely that she was quickly attracted to him, as he was an athletic and charismatic junior, and they began dating shortly thereafter. Those who knew Annette described her as quite different from her outgoing husband. While William enjoyed going out and socializing, Annette preferred to stay home and care for their children. Annette has always loved children. She was a gentle and kind woman with a remarkable ability to understand what children needed, which likely made her a wonderful mother. This talent may have also helped her soothe her easily frustrated husband on various occasions. Sadly, any potential witnesses who could shed light on their marriage have long since passed away, leaving us with only testimonies and sparse evidence to piece together their life together. However, one undeniable fact about William recently came to light. He cheated on Annette, possibly with multiple other women. This detail would be crucial in reviving interest in his case decades down the line. The early years of their marriage were said to be quite happy, as high school sweethearts. They represented what true love could look like, at least if we observe the surface and ignore all the rest. After marrying Annette, William focused on building the legacy he had always envisioned. He was multilingual, speaking Italian, French, Spanish, and Serbia-Croatia, and had a genuine passion for immersing himself in other cultures. With his education from Yale, he was well suited for a role in counterintelligence shortly after their wedding. He joined the Army's 3rd Military Intelligence Battalion and was stationed in Italy. For Annette, living in Europe must have felt like a dream, coming from a middle-class background. She may not have traveled outside the country before. During the next 4 years, William earned a reputation as a dependable soldier. Reports suggest that he was promoted and received several medals before being honorably discharged in 1963. By then, he had already traveled the world and worked with classified documents, demonstrating his ability to navigate foreign environments, desperate for recognition. William decided to join the Foreign Service after leaving the U.S. Army in 1966, where he had achieved the rank of Major. His first son, William Bradford Bishop III, was born about 2 years before he left the Army. Later, Annette gave birth to another son named Brenton Germain Bishop while stationed in Italy. The family lived in cities such as Verona, Milan, and finally, Florence, where Annette had their youngest son, Geoffrey Corder Bishop, about a year after Geoffrey's birth. William was informed that his next assignment would be in Africa. William enjoyed being involved in the tumultuous times of African history, and his career was thriving. In 1974, he was promoted to Assistant Chief in the Division of Special Activities and Commercial Treaties and was invited to work at the State Department's headquarters in Washington, D.C. William was not someone who preferred to work at a desk. From the very beginning, it was clear that he wanted to be off abroad, immersed in a new culture where he could flex his knowledge of languages, whether or not the move to Africa disturbed him. Having to come back to Washington may have been even worse. This is all speculation. Of course, what he wanted more than anything else was to maintain his upper-middle-class lifestyle. William felt that his career needed to maintain that exponential growth he'd seen early on. Unfortunately, things were not shaping up how he'd hoped. After being promoted to Assistant Division Chief, William eagerly awaited another promotion that never came. At this time, he and his family moved to a home in Bethesda, Maryland, allowing his mother, Lobelia, to stay with them. Juggling the responsibilities of raising 3 kids is challenging, so Annette likely appreciated the extra help. However, we may never fully understand how William felt about his mother's presence, given how events unfolded. It's possible he felt resentment towards her living with them. Reports indicate that Lobelia often criticized William for not advancing in his career. Leading to increasing tension over time, William began facing financial troubles. His government salary was no longer sufficient to cover his bills, and he might have had to ask his mother for financial assistance, which would have deeply affected his pride. His colleagues noticed that he became increasingly irritable at work, often complaining about being overlooked for promotions he believed he deserved. While seeming to blame everyone except himself, William held a belief that he was superior to others and deserved rapid advancement. Achieving the position of Assistant Division Chief at 38 may not have seemed impressive to him. He likely felt he should have accomplished more after spending over a decade in the Foreign Service. These thoughts, alongside other undisclosed factors, may have contributed to his gradually darkening mindset, which eventually drifted toward thoughts of homicide. An analysis of William's personal diary revealed that he was under significant stress during his 2-year stay in Washington, D.C. He complained of difficulties sleeping, and his psychiatrist prescribed a sedative called Serax, which was ineffective or at least did not help him fall asleep. It is important to note that missing doses of medications similar to Serax can lead to severe mood swings and increased agitation, especially for someone like him who is already facing personal challenges. Since Serax wasn't helping his insomnia, it is likely that William stopped taking it, consequently becoming emotionally unstable. The lack of sleep took a toll on him, and he also mentioned struggling with chronic depression, which medication could not alleviate. Additionally, various life events contributed to the emotional turmoil he was experiencing, a turmoil that would eventually drive him toward profound violence. Reports indicate that William was facing an impending Internal Revenue Service audit due to significant financial issues in his tax filings. This situation likely added stress to his personal life. He dealt with his mother's ongoing criticism about his career stagnation, along with his own frustration at being stuck in a desk job. He set his sights on a possible promotion that would send him back abroad. But this created further tension with his wife. His controlling personality may have made it difficult for Annette to fully enjoy living in different countries. Reports suggest she had begun studying art at the University of Maryland, which further upset William. He preferred that Annette stay home to care for their children while he pursued his duties in the Foreign Service, with their youngest child, now 5, and their oldest nearing adulthood. Annette might have been eager to take a step back from parenting and focus on herself for a change. Lobelia's presence made this possible. But it also meant that William was losing control over his family, something a control freak like him dreaded. Then, on March 1, 1976, he learned that the promotion he desperately wanted, the one he believed would solve all his problems, had been awarded to someone else. His hopes of leaving his desk job, receiving a salary increase, and proving his worth to his mother vanished. Soon after receiving the disappointing news, William informed his secretary that he felt unwell and would be going home early. The last sighting of William was outside the State Department building in the Foggy Bottom area of Washington, D.C. His colleague, Roy Harrell, noted that William looked very restless after leaving his office. The details of William's movements became unclear, but police confirmed that he withdrew all the money from his bank account. The amount he took out varied between a few hundred and a few $1,000s, highlighting how little he had after withdrawing the cash. William likely went to Montgomery Mall, where he bought a ball-peen hammer and a gas tank. He filled his car and the spare gas tank at a nearby gas station. Following that, he visited a hardware store and purchased a shovel and a pitchfork. He arrived home between 7:30 and 8 that evening. With the hammer in hand, police determined that he killed Annette first. She might have been in the kitchen preparing a meal or relaxing in the living room after the boys went to bed. It is likely that she was in the front hall when the attack occurred. Detectives later found blood in this area and in the upstairs bedrooms. William brutally killed his wife and then waited for his next victim to return home. Lobelia was out walking the family dog at the time. William may have timed his arrival based on his mother's absence, which made it easier for him to kill Annette without drawing too much attention. And the way he plotted his next moves suggests that the murders were planned, however. It's also possible he acted on impulse. The extreme violence he displayed indicates that he was not in a rational state of mind. Lobelia returned home and suffered the same fate as her daughter-in-law. William repeatedly struck his mother in the face with a hammer until she died. The boys were asleep during this time, suggesting that William may have taken the dog outside before killing Lobelia. Otherwise, the dog's barking would have woken them. William 3, Brenton, and Jeffrey were all in bed when their father came upstairs holding the bloody hammer he had just used to kill his wife and mother. The boys were still asleep while William attacked them. He placed the 5 bodies in his car and drove nearly 300 miles to North Carolina. The journey would have taken all night, and by the morning of March 20, he dug a shallow grave in a swamp near the town of Columbia, disposed of his family's bodies there, covered them with gasoline, and set them on fire. With the deed now done, William was free to make his getaway after disposing of his family's remains. William traveled to Jacksonville, where he purchased tennis shoes at a local sporting goods store. This part of the story becomes more puzzling, as witnesses reported that he was not alone. He had a dog with him, and some claimed he was accompanied by a dark-skinned woman. The store owner noted that the woman seemed to be from the Caribbean and was dressed elegantly. To him, they appeared to be a charming couple, and he described William as courteous and calm. William's next destination was the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, where his car was discovered on March 18th. The car contained dog biscuits, a bloody blanket, a shotgun, an axe, and William's shaving kit with banned substances in it. The spare tire well of the trunk was covered in blood. A witness stated that the car had likely been there since at least the 5th, suggesting that William had driven for 2 or 3 hours a day as he slowly made his way to the park when William drove to Jacksonville. The smoke from his family's burning bodies attracted the attention of Forest Service workers. A forest ranger was dispatched to investigate and discovered the family's charred remains, along with a shovel. 2 of the bodies were found facing each other. Their identities remained unknown until March 10th, when a worried neighbor contacted the Bethesda police, reporting that the Bishops had been missing for a while. When the police arrived, they found blood on the porch, hallway, and bedrooms, and they later identified the Bishop family members through dental records by the time William's car was discovered on March 18th. He had already vanished. Police attempted to track him along the Appalachian Trail, but were unsuccessful. William, an athletic man who enjoyed camping, had used his skills to gain a significant head start. He has not been located since, and the FBI removed him from their top 10 most wanted list in 2018. He is believed to be dead or living under an alias in the United States. Several other sightings have suggested he may have traveled to Switzerland and Italy, but none have been confirmed. The reasons behind William's actions remain unclear. However, in 2017, new information emerged that confirmed his history of secret affairs and the identity of a previously unknown child. Kathy Gilchrist was 18 years old when the Bishop family was murdered. This information is significant because Kathy is William's daughter. She had always known she was adopted and only learned about William when she began searching for her biological parents. Kathy was born before any of William's other children, and since she was born a year prior to his marriage to Annette, it is clear that he was definitely dating Annette at that time. This not only indicates that he cheated on Annette multiple times, but also suggests a possible motive that no one anticipated. Had Annette discovered his illegitimate daughter and confronted him, is that why William killed her and escaped? What do you think about the mysterious woman who was with him during his escape? We may never find out the answers to these questions. Do you believe William had been planning the murders from the beginning, or do you think it was a sudden decision? How did his secret daughter fit into this situation?